The first page. Have you ever found yourself trapped in a room where every door is sealed shut? You knock, you shout, you weep, but no one comes. Not because they cannot hear you, but because they will not. This is no longer loneliness. This is absolute helplessness. A prison with no bars, only the indifference and betrayal of those outside. Now imagine, you are 12 years old. They call you a king, yet the crown weighs like a chain around your neck. Your father is dead, your mother locked in a convent. Your younger brother coughs blood from the poison in his meals. And those you once trusted, men who bent the knee and swore loyalty, whisper in corners, when shall we free him from the throne? The Tower of London is not like other castles. It has no blazing halls, no feasts, no harp song. It has only stone, damp, cold stone, saturated with centuries of blood. They call it a fortress. It is a graveyard standing upright. By day, you hear the clatter of iron boots, guards changing shift like an hourglass dripping sand. By night, chains drag endlessly down the corridors, as though the ghosts of the damned are still being hauled to their deaths. On the walls of your chamber, you see carvings etched in dried blood, letters warped and trembling. I was king once. And beneath, the initials, E.V. You are Edward V, King of England. At least, that is what they once called you. But your throne is not in Westminster, nor in a glittering palace. It is here, in this tower of stone, where your bed is rotting wood and your only light a trembling candle, ready to die with the faintest breath of wind. You have heard your Uncle Richard say, over and over, "You are too young. Let me bear the burden of the crown." Sweet words, like a hand laid gently on your shoulder. But beneath the warmth, claws digging into flesh. You have seen the Duke of Buckingham kneel, promising, "If I rule, I will spare you." Yet at night, guards whisper, it was he who ordered their throats tightened. You have seen the priest lay his palm on your brother's fevered brow, praying, "Whom God chooses shall live. The rest will be cleansed in blood." And as the final words left his lips, your brother convulsed, red froth spilling down his chin onto the stone. You have seen envoys from France, from Scotland, slip you a coin carved with the devil's face, murmuring, "If you wish to survive, keep this on the last night." And when he vanished, your palm was sticky, a red slime like blood, though you had not been cut. And then, the cruelest rumor of all. Your mother herself had written to Richard, begging mercy for her children, in exchange for their silence forever. Edward scribbled in his diary, "Mother chose him, not me," then tore across the page so hard the parchment ripped, as though he could not bear to admit even to himself. In that diary, he wrote, "The living have the right to choose. I do not. All I may choose is the manner of my death, poison, rope, or to vanish in the dark. But I will leave the truth here. If anyone finds this, know that every hand around me drips with blood. Each page is a wound. One tells of Richard's footsteps in the night. Another, of Buckingham's eyes glowing red. Another, of prayers turned to curses. Another, of the foreign coin that reeked of blood, and scrawled in panic, with real blood. If my brother betrays me, I will let the tower devour him first." No one knows if it was Edward's own hand or the tower itself that wrote those words. But the letters remain, cold and merciless. And then silence. The final page is gone, torn out. They say Edward wrote the name of his killer. They say his last words were, "The murderer carries," then erased. When the diary was found centuries later, all that remained was the jagged wound of a missing page, stained with dried blood. That is the haunting. No one knows who killed them. No one knows if Edward died beneath the tower, or if his body lies hidden beneath the stair. We only know every faction had motive. Richard, who wanted the throne. Buckingham, who wanted to seize it. The church, eager to crown sin as God's will. The Tudors, desperate to erase York. Foreign hands, happy to sell a boy for gold. And perhaps even his own family, who chose silence. Anyone could be the killer. Perhaps all were complicit. If you stood in that room, what would you hear? The shallow breath of a boy scratching by candlelight. The hacking cough of his brother, fading into silence. The priest's prayer, twisting into a curse. The scrape of a hand carving letters into stone with blood. And at the end, the sound of paper tearing. A page ripped away, just as truth was torn from the boy's hand, and given to the victors. History is written by the victors, they say. But sometimes, history is not written at all. It is erased. The truth lingers only in darkness, in whispers, for those brave enough to listen. That is the story you are about to enter. Not Richard's story, not Shakespeare's, not the Tudors, but through the eyes of a child, betrayed, imprisoned, transformed into the tower's ghost. If you dare, open the first page of his diary, but do not expect to see the last. It is gone forever, along with the answer to one question. Who killed the princes in the tower? Today, the Tower of London is a tourist site. Thousands of feet treaded stones, stones that once drank blood. Cameras click, laughter echoes, but few notice the walls still breathing with soul's unrest. When the crowd passed through the North Hall, I lingered, my eyes pulled to a shadowed corner. On the damp wall, beneath moss, I saw scratches. I raised my phone light. My heart clenched. I was king once. Beneath, EV. I touched it. Cold. A smear of dried blood clung to my skin. The stone shifted, revealing a dark crevice. Inside, something glimmered. A rotting leather diary, stained red, stinking of iron. My hands shook, but I opened it. The first page bled with ink. If anyone finds this, read. This is my truth. A wind howled. My light died. Darkness swallowed me. And then, a child's voice whispered in my ear. Do you want to know? Then see through my eyes. I turned. Only stone. But the diary writhed in my hands. Ink bled across the page, morphing into visions. A stone cell, dragging chains, curses in Latin, the breath of a boy in the night. I was no longer a visitor. My hands shrank, thin, bony, 12 years old. I had been pulled into the diary. I was the witness. No, I was Edward V. The air filled with iron boots, shallow gasps, whispers drilling into my skull. The last page will never be read. I looked down. The diary's edge ripped raw, soaked in blood. The final page gone, and I understood. From this moment, I could only follow Edward. Richard, Buckingham, the Tudors, they could write their histories. But Edward left behind only torn truth. The whispers came again, louder now. If you open, you must go to the end. But remember, there is no answer. Only darkness. And blood. I swallowed hard, clutching the diary. And the journey began. The child on the throne. Have you ever watched a child sit on a throne and seen how small he truly is? He perches on the great chair, feet swinging uselessly above the floor like a young bird forced into a gilded cage. They call him king and shout his name until their voices scrape. Yet the cheering sounds like a hymn that has lost its rhythm, cracked in places. The crown on his head is too heavy. It bites the skin, opens a thin, wet seam. A bead of blood runs, mixing with sweat, tracking down his temple and darkening the collar of his shirt. He does not dare lift a hand to wipe it. Fear of being seen weak is itself a leash. But I see. From directly behind his shoulder the crimson falls, measured in secret, like the tick of a clock counting down. The great hall breathes in a fever of candlelight. Flames turn noble faces into masked specters. They smile, they bow, they chant long live. But in their eyes the boy is only a wooden puppet in a crown, a piece to be moved across a chessboard. Words whisper through the noise. He will never grow into it. His blood may not be legitimate. Edward may not understand every aside yet. I watch his eyelids flicker, an instinctive motion of storing scraps of speech to be stitched into his notebook later. Richard steps forward. He kneels, pronounces the words of fealty with sweet, viscous tones. His palm rests on his nephew's hand. Comfort, yes, but a wolf's look lingers in his eyes. This throne is heavy. He murmurs into the child's ear, the warmth of his voice masking the pressure of a hidden claw. Edward startles, then grips the arm of his chair until the knuckles blanch. He offers no reply. Instead, a question marks itself inside him, uncertain whether the smiling uncle is kindly guardian or butcher in waiting. Buckingham follows in his velvet and silk, a glinting sword at his hip. He bows, earns his compliments like a performance, but the fingers curling the hilt tremble just so. Something hungry smolders in his gaze. He leans in, bearing a grin that reveals stained teeth. If the throne becomes empty, I'll keep it warm. The boy lifts his head, a flash of understanding sparks in his eyes. He does not yet grasp all the insinuations, but he smells the edge of threat. Honeyed words often hide a blade. Then the priest, the white of his vestments like a shroud in the smoke of the candles. places a palm on Edward's brow and intones a prayer. May the Almighty guide his sovereign. Yet in the intervals between the holy syllables another sound slips through, viscous as pitch, as if the stone itself speaks. Blood must be cleansed. Edward clamps his eyes shut, practicing the pious mask, and the tiny hairs on his forearms rise into a draft of terror. He cannot tell truth from trickery. I, who stand behind him, see the game clearly. Faith repurposed into chains, God reconstituted as witness to the sentence. The church bell falls heavy as a coffin lid. Incense thickens into a haze that blurs the throng into black smudges. On the upper gallery, like a coal half hidden in soot, a shadow stands motionless, two pinprick sparks for eyes, watching from the dark and fixed upon the boy's brow. Edward shivers. I look where he looks. When I blink, the figure is gone. Perhaps only we saw it. Tower is full of hands that pull strings from behind curtains. Nameless, faceless operators who never step into the light. He straightens. There is a quickening in his small face, a cleverness half-kindled. He is learning to observe, to file away faces and phrases in the drawers of memory. But such education is unfinished. He senses the net closing, but does not yet know that the net is woven of stone as well as oath, a lattice of curses handed down through mortar and time. Swords strike the floor, an iron punctuation, the sound of history locking a lid. The crown grows heavier. The drop of blood increases by the measure of a clock beat. Edward bites his lip white. I hear the whisper in his mind. If I cannot live as king, I will die as witness. I stand at his back and know more than he does. He will be not merely a witness, but a victim, one whom history will try to silence. He may write, but he will not tidy his pages. The last leaf will be torn. When the ceremony concludes and he rises, the sensation crawling along his nape is not the awe of audience, but the chill of being watched. From where I stand, I see him pause between two stone pillars, fingers still clinging to the chair as though for the last scrap of life. Candlelight outlines the fine veins at his wrist. He has learned to wear stillness like a coat. His eyes, however, glitter with alertness. There are truths a child cannot read, yet there is another faculty, instinct, that begins to register the tightened strings. Along the corridor the attendants bow and shuffle. Between two pillars is a darkness that does not belong to any human shadow. The first time I took it for natural shade. The second time, upon closer study, it is like a hole in the air, a small window into the anonymous eye. Edward half turns, hearing something no one else does. His head tilts forward and then recoils by a half step, as if someone had breathed a word directly into his ear. The grown men babble on oblivious. Only I, close as a second skin, witness the small head seeking signs of truth inside a theater thick with masks. Poison does not reveal itself at once. It enters like some undefinable tang in the air. At supper, Edward eats carefully, measured, noting the face of the cupbearer, the scar on the soldier's forearm, the habit of a man who bows as if to hide something. Everything becomes a mental ledger. Memory, I thought, might be his salvation. If you can remember, you will be able to name. But there are stains that memory cannot erase. The slow work of a toxin blurs the edges from within. A grizzled guard with a crescent scar across his cheek lingers at Edward's door longer than duty requires. When the boy turns away, he leans close, listening for breaths. A soft metallic click, some signal. Later, a gray-eyed lackey brings a goblet. Edward drinks, one sip, two. On the second swallow, his pupils widen. For a flash, he sees his face in the cup's mirrored surface, and the reflected mouth smiles when his own does not. He sets it down, draws a deep breath. A smile that isn't his edged the rim of the cup like a smirk placed by another hand. The priest comes again into the private chamber. He reads a psalm and, under the guise of comfort, slips a small carved seed into Edward's palm, a round thing black with a stamped holy symbol. Keep it, he croons. God will protect you. Edward rolls it in that child hand and sniffs. A chemical whiff stabs at the back of his throat. For an instant I see, perhaps I imagine, white rootlets like fine hair pushing outward from the seed as if to burrow into skin. I step back. It is gone. He tucks the seed into his sleeve, and thereafter when fear tears at him, he will rub the small object the way a man rubs a talisman. Promise or trap? That night, he wakes ravenous. Another cup arrives, another drink. He grips the edge of the table to steady himself. Breath stumbles. He repeats names like a litany: Richard, Buckingham, the priest, the scarred guard, the gray-eyed lackey. He adds a name under his breath, too softly for others to hear. Mother. The syllable hangs like a doubt. Did Mother send the letter? He murmurs. Is it truth or rumor? The question swallows itself as footsteps freeze, then resume beyond the corridor. Voices begin to press against the chamber walls. Not Edward so much as you. A whispered second person that slides like oil along stone. Once, I assumed I had imagined it. Later, I look down at my own hand and find a bruise shaped exactly like 5 fingers where the tower's unseen grip left a print. Am I the one who stands behind him? Or has the tower drawn me into the skin of the boy? Edward tilts his head as if he hears the very whisper I hear. Who? He asks. I am silent. The dark answers only with a faint scrape against the rock. Buckingham calls later for a brief audience. He strolls in with the magnanimity of a man who owns the air, touches the bed frame as if testing its grain, glances at the notebook peeking from Edward's breast. Those who write too soon will write badly, he tells the child. Those who read too late will read poorly. Edward returns without hesitation. It is an answer not learned from grown men, but from the small, fierce logic of one learning to defend his world in ink. Rumor seeps in like cold mist. Their mother, confined within a convent, has written a plea, mercy for the children in exchange for eternal silence. What is silence here? Exile? Interment in wall mortar? He reads the phrase from the lips of a footman without changing his face, only carving a fresh fissure into his expression. That evening he opens his book. Mother chose him, not me. He scratches out the line, raw and furious, as if unable to accept the confession even from his own hand. The younger brother begins coughing in a manner I have not heard outside fever dreams, an animal rasp, as if something soft is lodged across his throat. The priest returns his palm to the boy's brow and murmurs, "Those chosen will live." The words "chosen to live" fall like lead. Edward lifts a pillow and finds tiny flecks of fresh red upon it. He looks at me, or through me, and says with a kind of cruel, childish curiosity, "Does the tower choose?" I do not answer. A raven on the sill gives a single blunt cry and is suddenly still. One late afternoon, he draws aside a tapestry and finds a child's handprint in the dust on the frame. Elongated fingers, oddly long. He presses his palm into the print. It fits with a small, cold consonants. He flinches back as if burned. I reach out, or imagine touching him, and feel the chill of a closed lid. That night he takes a pen. The first strokes are slow, like coagulated ink. He writes and erases. I trust my uncle. The word trust stumbles into treason, then into blood. He pauses, a laugh that is all wrong for his age escapes him, a little, unstitched sound. He scrawls instead, I trust blood. I feel a sharp cold. This is not the brave child of a single note. He drifts among 3 currents, wishing to trust to live, striving to resist to remain himself, and being tugged by the dark that seeks to swallow both. At midnight a coin clatters. He picks it up, an ugly token carved with a demon's face. Keep it for the last night, a foreign voice had said. He presses the metal to his tongue, and the taste of iron makes him wince. Under the candles blaze the demon's grin shimmers, and, absurdly, looks like his own. He drops it, and it rolls into shadow like an eye seeking a socket. The second-person voice returns, you. It breathes, right into the ear. On his page a thin line of letters fingering themselves into life. Are you writing, or am I? He holds his finger, smeared with blood, and draws a smudge across the line. If I cannot write the last page, who will? He whispers. I do not know how to answer, for in that breath I realize the last page may not belong to any single hand. Morning, the bell rings early. Guards exchange themselves at odd hours. Foreign-soled boots chafe against the stone. Richard passes the doorway, pauses, and with a smooth hand straightens his sleeve. Be calm, he tells the air as if it were a patient child. Yet at that instant a cold gust slips down the boy's neck, a little choke that only the person immediately behind could hear. He gasps, then exhales. I place my hand, my imagined hand, upon his back. It feels like a lid settling. From that moment the apparatus tightens. Meals thin. Aromatics applied to the brow sting. Candles gutter faster. The younger brother coughs at times too precise to be natural. Handprints bloom where no hands touched. Each time Edward closes his eyes, he sees himself again upon the throne, crown biting his skin, blood falling in tempo with the bell. He opens his eyes to the stone room. He writes, crosses out, writes anew. The living choose, he scribbles. He stops. I do not. He stops. But I will write. He stops. If this page is ripped, the stone will remember. He lays down his pen. I hear, distant as a lever, the faint click of some lock being depressed. He turns to me at last and stares straight through, or at me. You've been behind me from the start, haven't you? He asks, as if finally naming the shadow. I hold my breath. For the fraction of a beat that is everything, I see my own face reflected in his pupils, pale, warped, marked with a bruise of 5 fingers stamped upon the throat. The line between him and I thins. Tower desires not just Edward, but the one behind him. And already the little game is underway. Turn a king into a puppet. Turn a witness into a torn page. Tower does not merely consume, it rewrites. And the true cruelty is the knowledge that, in a place like this, a child can be made to bleed his own record into the stone. Tower will swallow them both if it can. The boy sat upon the great chair, his small legs dangling above the ground, like a fledgling forced into a gilded cage. They called him king. They cheered long live the crown, but the acclamation broke like a hymn sung out of key, jagged and false. The crown pressed too heavily upon his tender skull, cutting tiny grooves that bled. Warm droplets slid down his temple, mixing with sweat, soaking the collar of his robe. He dared not raise a hand to wipe them away. Weakness was forbidden. Yet I saw them fall, standing just behind his shoulder, each drop ticking like a clock counting down toward some unseen end. The hall flickered with candlelight, turning noble faces into masks of wax and shadow. They smiled, bowed, and praised, but their eyes betrayed them. To them, the boy was no sovereign, only a puppet carved from soft wood, a convenient piece for their endless game of power. Among the clamor, I heard the whispers woven between applause. He will never live long enough to rule. His blood is not even lawful. Edward might not have understood the full meaning, but his lashes blinked quick and nervous, capturing fragments of words like shards of glass. Shards he would later copy into his secret journal by candlelight. Then came Richard. He knelt, swore loyalty, his voice sweet as honey, yet his eyes were wolf's eyes. His hand pressed gently on his nephew's, whispering, "This throne is heavy. It may crush your skull at any moment." Edward stiffened, gripping the armrest as if clinging to thin ice. He did not answer, but a question carved itself deep within. Was this the smile of a guardian, or the measurement of a butcher? Next strode Buckingham, cloak of silk trailing, sword gleaming. He bowed with booming voice, but his hand twitched on the hilt. In the pits of his gaze smoldered ambition hot as coal. He leaned close, bearing a yellowed fawn. "If the throne should fall vacant, I shall keep it warm." Edward's eyes flashed, a child's mind grasping enough of the threat to taste its venom. Sweet words, sharp knives. Then the priest. His white vestments drifted through incense like a shroud. He touched Edward's brow, his chant even and holy. "May the Almighty guide his majesty." Yet beneath the sacred syllables slid another note, thick and tar-like, a voice not human but echoing from the stone. Blood must be cleansed. Edward kept his face composed, but goose flesh rippled his skin. Faith had become a chain, God reduced to a witness signing death warrants. The church bells tolled overhead like hammers striking coffin nails. Smoke stung the eyes, the crowd blurred into smudges of black. And in the rafters, I glimpsed a figure unmoving, eyes glimmering like coals fixed upon the boy's brow. Edward's heart lurched. I blinked, and the figure was gone. No one else stirred. The tower had always hidden its nameless watchers. Edward straightened, the small flame of intelligence flickering brighter in his eyes. He was learning to observe, to sort, to store names like evidence. But knowledge is half-grown in children. He knew only that he was trapped, not yet how deep the snare ran. Swords struck the floor in unison, echoing like bolts sliding home on history's doors. The crown grew heavier, blood trickled anew. Edward bit his lip pale. I heard his thought as a whisper brushing my ear. If I cannot live as king, I will die as witness. I knew better. He would die as both. A witness gagged by history, able to write, but never allowed to pen the final page. When the ceremony ended, Edward rose. As he turned from the throne, he shivered as though insects crawled his neck. Not fear of the crowd, something subtler. The prickle of unseen eyes. He halted between the marble columns, fingers clinging to the carved wood as if clutching the last splinter of his life. Candlelight caught the fine veins at his wrist, making the dried streaks of blood shine like etched runes. His face was calm, mask of discipline, but his eyes glittered sharp, already learning suspicion. Along the corridor, attendants bowed. Between the pillars lurked a darkness that was not shadow but a hole in the air, a window for some nameless gaze. Edward slowed, tilting his head as though a silent breath had brushed his ear. His shoulders dipped forward, then recoiled. Courtiers chattered on, oblivious. Only I, standing near, saw his young head strain toward truth amidst the theater of masks. Poison leaves no scars at first. It enters like an unnamed odor. Supper seemed harmless. Edward ate dutifully, eyes flicking to memorize servant scars, soldiers' postures, every detail for his invisible ledger. He believed memory could save him. Yet already, the venom crept, blurring lines from within. On the second night, he forgot a name. On the third, his eyes sagged for a breath too long. Adults called it fatigue, dabbing scented water on his brow. But I saw him straining to hold his posture, to carve each sight into stone, knowing that once memory slipped, others' lies would fill the void. A scarred guard lingered long at the door, head tilted to catch his breath. I heard the faint tap of metal, signal. Later, a gray-eyed servant brought a silver cup. Edward drank once, twice. The second swallow widened his pupils. In the reflection, his own face smiled, while his lips did not. He set the cup down, chest rising. A smile that was not as curved across the rim. The priest came again, rosary beads clinking like chains. He pressed a small orb carved with holy symbols into Edward's palm. Keep it. God will protect you. Edward rolled it in his hand. A faint medicinal tang stung my nose. For a breath, I saw pale roots sprout from the orb, burrowing into his skin. I recoiled, but when I blinked, his palm was bare. Hallucination, or the tower's trick. Edward pocketed it. Thereafter, whenever doubt gnawed him, his fingers sought the orb, stroking promise, or trap. That night, thirst racked him. Another cup arrived. After he drank, his heartbeat faltered. I pressed close to his nape, hearing its crooked rhythm. He murmured, "Remember, remember," then recited names like a litany. Richard, Buckingham, the priest, the scarred guard, the gray-eyed servant. At last, whispered another name, barely audible. Mother. My blood chilled. He did not turn. Mother sent a letter? Or was that a lie? The question dissolved as footsteps paused outside, then moved on. His younger brother coughed strangely, wet, obstructed. The priest declared, "He who is chosen shall live." The word chosen clanged heavy as lead. Edward later lifted the pillow. Red flecks stained the linen. He whispered, half to me, half to the walls. Who does the tower choose? Rumors seeped like cold mist. His mother, confined in a convent, had begged Richard to spare her sons, trading silence for survival. Silence meant what? Exile, or burial within the walls. Edward recorded in his journal, "Mother chose him. Not me." The nib tore the page. He slashed the line out, refusing to see his own confession. The ink spread like a wound. Buckingham visited again. He touched the bedpost, smirked at the hidden journal. "Write too early, and you'll write wrongly." Edward answered steady. "Read too late, and you'll read falsely." Their eyes locked. The Duke smiled and left. The candle flared green, as if in applause. Night fell. A coin clattered at the barred window. Edward retrieved it. A foreign coin, carved with a demon's grin. "Keep it for your last night," a messenger had once whispered. Edward pressed it to his tongue, tasting rust and blood. By candlelight, the demon's grin shifted into his own. He dropped it. It rolled into shadow like a wandering eye. And then, he turned to me. Truly to me. His voice trembled. "You've stood behind me from the start, haven't you?" My lungs froze. For an instant, his blackened pupils reflected my face. My own face, bruised, marked by 5 phantom fingers tightening on my throat. I understood. The line between witness and victim was blurring. The tower was not content to devour Edward. It meant to devour me as well. The page that must not be torn. The next morning brought no sunrise. Only a suspended gray, like a veil of ash draped over London's sky. From the narrow window, the north wind carried the smell of the river mixed with rust. Edward woke to the sound of his brother's cough, uneven, like oars splashing out of rhythm. He sat up too fast, head swimming, hand clutching the bedpost for balance. Upon the wood, I saw a dark red smear, as though someone had once gripped it too hard. Edward pressed his chest, leaned close to his brother's lips. The boy's breath was thin and wet, each exhale unraveling like a fragile thread from a spool. Edward placed his small hand on his brother's fevered brow, lips pressed shut, then turned away swiftly, afraid that tears might betray him to unseen eyes watching through the cracks. He reached for his journal. The nib scraped dry paper like claws on stone. "Last night," he wrote, "I heard my name spoken, but the voice was not my own." The letters formed slowly. For an instant, so brief it might not have existed, I saw his name, Edward, stretch, twist, and warp toward Rich, before the pen jerked back, straining like a bowstring to restore Edward in awkward strokes. Edward saw it too. He stared at the nib as though it were a beast resisting his hand. "Do not change my name," he whispered. I shivered. Something within the tower was trying to rewrite him on the page. And if the name were altered, would the boy himself remain? The guards changed shifts early. Boots struck stone with deliberate rhythm, not hurried, not slow, an announcement that their will was stronger than time itself. The scarred guard with the crescent across his cheek lingered longer than usual. He yawned, but his eyes did not tire. They counted breaths, pauses of the pen, beads of sweat rolling down a child's temple. When he departed, the gray-eyed servant arrived with the breakfast tray, dry bread, a thin bowl of water, and at the rim, a faint gleam like an oil slick. Edward bent closer, sniffed nothing, yet his lips dried at once. He glanced at me, or through me, then pushed the bowl aside. "Don't drink," he told his brother. "Thirsty," came the hoarse reply. Edward dabbed his sibling's lips with his sleeve. "Wait a little longer." Then he wrote, "Since they made me thirst, they have known my life will be short." Rumors dropped into the room like warm embers. As the servant left, he let slip a morsel. "They say Tudor sails have touched the coast. Only small boats, but with strange flags." He chuckled, not like a man amused, but like one scattering bait for birds. His laughter was soft, yet loud enough to fill the room. Edward's eyes lifted. For a heartbeat they shone, piercing through fatigue. "If he comes, will I be saved?" I knew the truth, and it parched my throat. The tower did not care which man wore the crown. The tower only required the story be torn. Edward seemed to read that thought within me. The light in his eyes dimmed. He closed the journal, leaving a blank page bare as an uncarved grave. At noon, Richard arrived. No retinue, only himself, and the shadow trailing him like diluted ink. He lingered at the threshold, half his face concealed by gloom. "How fares my nephew today?" His voice was the kind any child longs to trust. Edward straightened, trying to appear strong. "Better," he said, then coughed into his hand. A faint red stain crept across his knuckles. Richard pretended not to see. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "In the days to come, many will say your blood is not lawful. Do not fear. I will bear it." He left the verb hanging, a noose not yet tied. Edward met his gaze. "I can stand on my own." Richard smiled. "I know, but the throne does not stand on its own." He turned to leave. In that flicker, I caught the narrow gleam in his eyes, cold as a blade passing across a throat before vanishing back into its sheath. As the door closed, the air reversed, like wind changing course. Buckingham entered next, empty hands, but words brimming. He told a jest of a fool who wore a crown too large, forced to hold it with both hands all day, until his fingers withered. He laughed until bent double, then halted, leaning close to Edward. "Are you not afraid your arms may tire?" Edward did not laugh. "If my arms tire, I will let the crown fall." "Ah," Buckingham murmured. "Then I shall pick it up." He flicked the air, as though tapping a child's forehead, then left. From beneath the bed, yesterday's apple oozed more golden liquid, spreading into a dark stain, sweet and rotten like flowers left too long in a grave. The priest arrived late, hem of his robe brushing dust. He laid his rosary on the table, beads clinking like shackles. "Have you prayed today, child?" Edward nodded. "And what did you pray for?" "For my brother." "And for yourself?" "For the last page," Edward replied too quickly, like a sob disguised as speech. The priest smiled, or rather, half his mouth curved down, half up, a gash more than a smile. "The last page belongs to God," he said. "Whoever tears it, God will know." "And will he return it?" Edward asked. "He returns with silence." His hand pressed the boy's brow. In that instant, I heard not prayer but stone grinding, a voice of the tower speaking through human throat. "Night." Edward's brother curled tight, coughs deepening. Edward dozed, then jolted upright as though pulled by the hair. "Do not," he whispered into darkness, "do not call my name." A shape stood in the doorway, no eyes, yet staring. Edward scratched on the page, "Someone at the door." No face, but I am seen. Even as the words formed, a black drop fell from the ceiling, blooming like spilled ink across the page. Edward snatched the book aside, breath ragged. "Do you see it?" he asked me. I wanted to nod, but my shoulders were weighted, as if a hand pressed them down. The next morning, muddy footprints marked the stair, brought from the river. Guards scraped them away quickly, as if afraid of trails. Another rumor, a damp-haired stranger claiming to be a messenger entered the chapel. By noon, Edward was brought to a chamber with a narrow slit overlooking the Thames. Inside waited a hooded man with gloves of leather. His voice barely above a breath, "Your Majesty." He placed a thick sheet upon the table, seal broken, wax embossed with a tiny dragon. "A signal from across the sea," he whispered. Edward stared but did not touch. The man cracked the seal, a sliver of wax dropping to the stone. The smell of resin and burnt wick rose. Inside, the lines read, "Every throne requires a bearer. Every bearer requires silence." Edward's eyes darkened. "If I agree to silence, who will speak for me?" The messenger shrugged. "God or history? What is the difference?" "The difference," the man murmured, "is who holds the pen." That evening, the tower shed its skin. Moss on the walls glistened greener, veins like capillaries spreading across stone. Water seeped faintly. Edward leaned his forehead against the wall, too weary to stand. When he pulled back, his skin left a cold imprint, a faint sigil of sweat and blood salt. I touched it. My palm burned as though pressed to winter iron. Patterns spiraled into my flesh, the same sigil that had marked the window days before. When I clenched my fist, I heard pages turning. Not mine, not his, ours. Slowly, deliberately, as though someone unseen was reading our lives aloud. That night, Edward counted stars through the slit window with his brother. 1, 2, 3. At 4, the clouds swallowed them. He smiled faintly. "The stars hide from us." His brother laughed weakly, then coughed until his face blued. Edward steadied him, panic tightening his body. When the boy slept, Edward sat on the bed's edge, journal on his knee. "I dreamed of Mother," he wrote. "She said, 'Sleep, sleep. Sleep is peace.'" The letters staggered like steps on a broken bridge. Did Mother write a letter? Did she choose him? Or did the tower steal her voice? A tear fell, blurring the word mother into a black blot. Within it, I imagined lips moving, whispering, "Sleep." The lamplight stretched Edward's shadow long and thin, a cord across the wall. Suddenly it jerked, as if tugged by unseen hands. Edward froze. His own legs were still. "Did you pull it?" he asked, staring at the air where I stood. "If you pull, then pull until it breaks." I wished to say, I did not, but my throat closed, stitched by black thread. Another voice answered through me, velvet soft, iron sharp. "Not yet." Past midnight, Edward tied a strip of cloth from his wrist to his brother's. "So they cannot take him. So I will not let go." The knot bit deep, bruising their skin. It would not deter fleshly hands, but perhaps those without flesh. "Tower," he whispered, "if you must, devour me after him." Then he startled, correcting himself. "No, devour me instead of him." He pressed the word instead so hard into the page that the nib tore through, leaving wounds in the parchment. Near dawn, he drifted into fitful sleep. I sat beside him, hearing water drip inside the walls, hearing stone grind faintly. Footsteps passed, paused at the door. A knife-thin gleam of light slid across the floor, then vanished. Behind me, a breath drew deep. I spun, shoulders striking cold stone. No one. Yet frost burned my neck, as though a drop of ice had touched me. My palm bore the spiral sigil once more, darker now, like dried ink. 5 small bruises bloomed at its edges, fingerprints pressed from nowhere. When Edward woke, he looked straight at me, or at the air where I stood. "You must not leave me," he said calmly. "If you go, I will forget my own name." I could not speak. I only nodded, or dreamed that I nodded. He smiled gently, then snuffed the smile like a candle blown in secret. That afternoon, another cruel gift arrived. A small wooden mask, crudely carved, painted with a false grin. Someone had slipped it beneath the door. Edward lifted it, pressed it to his face. Cold, heavy, smelling of fresh wood and mold. He sat still for a minute, then ripped it off, shaking violently. He hurled it to the ground. It split in two. I heard it laugh in my ear, he said, eyes wild. It told me to say, "I am not king." He scrawled furiously, "I am king." The letters stabbed through the parchment, tearing holes. He pressed his hand flat over the rip. "Do not tear before me," he whispered. Later, his brother stirred, clutching Edward's hand tight. "Tonight they will come. Do not speak. Do not look." "Who?" "The one in white." Mother said, "Do not look at her face." Edward shivered. "Mother spoke to you?" "In a dream." The boy coughed, voice cracking. Edward held him close, then turned toward me. "If they come, do not let me hear them." His plea sounded like a cry from the bottom of a well. I wished I had hands to cover his ears. All I had was a shadow's presence. Midnight. The chapel door quivered. A white shimmer drifted through the corridor, glowing like tallow flame. No footfalls, only fabric brushing stone. It did not enter by the door. It had been here always, waiting before walls were built. I stood behind Edward, but realized suddenly I was in front of him, a shield between him and the white shape. "Son," the voice whispered within prayers, "put down the pen." Edward clutched his journal, shook his head. "You need not speak. Only be silent." Edward screamed without sound, mouth wide, then scrawled with the desperation of one whose hand is about to be severed. "The living may choose. I cannot, but I still write." The page ended. He reached to turn it. An unseen hand pressed the edge. The room shrank, walls folding like fingers. I was shoved against the boy's back. My neck burned with 5 bruises. His shoulder bore the same. For one heartbeat, our bodies overlapped. I was him, he was me. I heard the crackle of paper fibers, something about to tear. Edward gritted his teeth. "Not tonight," he hissed. "Not yet." The white shape sank, sliding into the floor like frost. The door neither opened nor closed. Only shadows changed shape. His brother slept on, their wrists bound by the cloth strip, blood seeping where it cut. Edward exhaled, forehead to the journal. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "tomorrow I will write faster." I laid, or thought I laid, my hand upon his nape. For the first time, the tower ceased to breathe. It held its breath like a beast considering its prey. Outside, a single bell tolled. Not the hour of prayer. A test, perhaps, or a signal. The tower was ready. Between 2 pillars, the darkness was no longer darkness. It had become a shallow niche, just wide enough to hide a folded page. Edward understood, and so did I. Tomorrow, they would try to tear. By morning's second bell, Edward awoke, wrists swollen raw beneath the knotted cloth. His brother slept fitfully, lungs rattling like sawnwood underwater. Edward gently untied the strip, then tied it tighter, whispering, "I trust nothing but this rope." He opened his journal. His hand trembled, but his strokes cut deep. "They will try to tear. I must write faster." The nib ripped through parchment. His palms bore ridges of scar and blood, hands of a 12-year-old, yet worn as though they had tortured thousands. Later that morning, Richard returned, this time with nobles. They carried a roll of parchment sealed in red wax. Edward sat upright, feigning majesty, though I saw his throat tremble beneath the crown. Richard raised the scroll. His voice was gentle, yet heavy with command. "Only a formality, nephew. A declaration that this throne shall be safeguarded by the family. With your signature, you remain king in the people's hearts." Edward studied the parchment. The words twisted and shimmered. Release, surrender, renounce. With each blink, the phrases changed, written by many hands, many intentions. He did not sign. Instead, he asked, "If I sign, does that mean I live?" Richard hesitated, just enough to crack his smile. "You will be safe." Edward laid his hand upon the journal. "Safe is not alive." He smiled, a cold smile, uncanny on a child's face. The journal groaned, eager to inscribe what was not written. That afternoon, Buckingham returned. No parchment, no wax, only steel. He drew his sword halfway, letting the blade's gleam streak the wall. "Boy," he said, "one day you will learn. The throne is not for children. It stands only by blood. If the blood is weak, the throne collapses." Edward was silent, staring at the blade. In his dark eyes, I saw my own face reflected, distorted, pale. He laid the journal upon his knee and wrote slowly. "Which sword raises the throne? Which sword brings it down?" Buckingham laughed, sheathed his weapon. "A clever boy. Cleverness only hastens death." He left. Edward tore back his sleeve, showing the journal pressed to his bruised wrist. He looked at me, voice low. "Do you hear? They want blood, not words. Then I shall write with blood." He pricked his finger, let a drop fall fresh upon the page. "I am king. I live." That night, the priest returned again. This time, no prayers. He laid his rosary beads in a circle, and within it placed a white mask. "Wear it," he said, his voice rising from some crypt below. Edward stared, trembling. "If I wear it, am I still myself?" The priest's smile cut deeper. "You will be everything. King, ghost, silence." Edward shook his head, clutching the journal. "If silent, who writes the last page?" The priest did not answer. He pushed the mask nearer. At that moment, the candles died, leaving only the mask's pale glow. It no longer seemed an object, but an open mouth. Edward scrawled in fury. "Tonight I choose words, not masks." The nib shredded the page, leaving holes like stab wounds. Near dawn, his brother's cough worsened. Edward held him, eyes fevered, torn between love and madness. "If you betray me, the tower will swallow you first," he rasped, then instantly collapsed, sobbing. "No, no, you will not betray. Only the tower betrays us." I watched, chilled. Love and insanity now balanced on a single breath. In the journal, many leaves were missing. Half a page remained. Mother chose him, not me. Blood smeared into the shape of a child's hand. Morning brought no sunrise. Only a hanging gray, like ash draped over the London sky. From the slit of a window, the north wind crept in with the stink of river and rust. Edward woke to his brother's cough, uneven, like oars splashing out of rhythm. He sat up too fast, the world pitching, one hand clutching the bedpost to keep from falling. On the post, a dark red smear, the mark of someone who'd clung too hard. He pressed his chest, then bent close to his brother's mouth. The boy's breath was sparse and wet, each exhale tugging a filament from a fraying spool. Edward set his small palm to that fevered brow, lips tight, then turned away quickly, as if afraid tears would be seen through the cracks of the door. He took up the journal. The nib skated on dry paper with a sound like nails scouring stone. "Last night," he wrote, "someone called me by name, but the voice wasn't mine." The letters formed slow as frost. For a heartbeat, so brief it might have been imagined, the name Edward stretched and warped toward Rich, before the pen snapped taut like a bowstring and scratched the proper name back, clumsy and shaken. He noticed. He stared at the nib as if it were some beast refusing his hand. "Don't change my name," he whispered. Something in the tower was already trying to rewrite him. And if a name is altered, what becomes of the body that bears it? The guards changed early. Hobnails kept a ritual rhythm, neither haste nor leisure, a declaration that there will outran the hour. The crescent-scarred sentry loitered longer than usual. He yawned, but his eyes didn't. His eyes counted. Breaths, pin pauses, beads of sweat moving down a child's temple. When he left, the gray-eyed servant brought a tray, dry bread, a thin bowl of water, at whose rim a faint, oily gleam slid like a secret. Edward sniffed nothing, yet his mouth turned to dust. He glanced at me, or through me, then pushed the bowl aside. "Don't drink," he told his brother. "Thirsty," the boy rasped. Edward wet the child's lips with his sleeve. "Wait a little," then wrote, "Since they made me thirst, they have known my life will be short." Rumor fell into the room like warm cinders. At the door, the servant let one crackle loose. Market says Tudor sails touched shore. Small boats, strange flags. He chuckled, the way a man laughs when scattering bait. Soft, and somehow louder for being soft. Edward's eyes lifted. For a blink, they blazed through fatigue. If he comes, will I be saved? I knew the answer, and it made my throat a kiln. The tower does not care who wears the crown. The tower requires only that the story be torn. Edward must have read that knowledge in me. The light in his gaze guttered. He shut the book, leaving a blank page over white as an unnamed grave. At noon, Richard came. No retinue, only himself, and the shadow that followed like watered ink. He stopped at the threshold, half his face kept by the dark. How fares my nephew? His was the voice any child wants to trust. Edward sat straighter. Better, he said, and coughed into his knuckles. A faint red slicked the joints. Richard pretended he did not see. He stepped half a pace and spoke softly. In days coming, some will say your blood is not lawful. Do not fear. I will bear it. He let the verb dangle, a noose not yet tied to a beam. I can stand, Edward said. I know, Richard smiled. But the throne does not stand. When he turned away, I saw it, a thin, very cold glint in the eye. The gleam of a blade that has already tested a throat before sheathing. The air reversed like a wind. Buckingham entered, empty hands, full mouth. He told a jest about a fool with a crown too large, forced to hold it all day until his hand withered. He laughed himself crooked, then stopped short and whispered near Edward's ear. Are you not afraid your arms will tire? If they do, I will let the crown fall, the boy answered. Ah, Buckingham breathed, then I will catch it. He flicked the air, like flicking the brow of a stranger's child, and left. From beneath the bed, yesterday's apple bled more golden-rod, widening its aureole. The room smelled of sweetness left to die. The priest arrived late, robe hem tasting dust. He set his rosary down, beads tapping like links struck on stone. Have you prayed? A nod. For what? My brother. And for yourself? For the last page, he said too quickly, like a hiccup he tried to swallow. The priest smiled, if a wound can smile. Half the mouth turned down, half up. The last page belongs to God, he murmured. Who tears it, he will know. Will he return it? He answers with silence. His palm touched the child's brow. In that touch I heard not prayer, but stone grinding. The tower speaking through a throat it wore like lace. Night. The younger boy curled tight, his cough changed pitch. Edward dozed and sprang up as though yanked by the hair. Don't, he told the darkness, don't call my name. A figure stood in the door, no eyes, and yet it stared. Edward scratched. Someone stands at the door. No face, but I am seen. As the ink dried, a black drop fell from the ceiling and blossomed across the line like spilled night. Edward jerked the journal away, breathing fast. Do you see? He asked. Perhaps me, perhaps the air. I tried to nod, but something heavy laid its hand on my shoulders. Morning left muddy flecks on the stair, river prints. The guards erased them quickly, as if a trail might bloom into a verdict. Another whisper, a wet-haired stranger, a messenger, had entered the chapel. At noon Edward was taken to a narrow room with a slit of river. A hooded man waited, leather gloves and a lowered voice. Your Majesty. A thick paper, seal cracked, the wax a tiny dragon, pressed upon the table. He broke it further, the chip of resin falling like a red tooth. Inside, the lines were few. Every throne requires hands. Every pair of hands requires silence. If I agree to silence, Edward asked, who will speak for me? God, the man said, or history? What is the difference? The difference, he said, is who holds the pen. By evening, the tower had new skin. Moss brightened. What is fresh breath? Thin cracks like veins climbed along the corridor. Edward leaned his forehead to the wall. When he drew back, the stone had stamped his skin with cold. The stone itself held a faint seal of sweat and salt. I touched it, and my palm burned as on winter iron. Spirals rose in my flesh, the same sigil that had filmed the window nights before. When I clenched my fist, I heard pages turning. Ours, yours, mine, turned by no hand I could name. Edward counted stars with his brother. 1, 2, 3, at 4, cloud. They hide from us, he smiled. The boy laughed once and coughed until he blued. Edward steadied him, body nodding with fright. When the child slept, Edward wrote, "I dreamed of mother. She said, 'Sleep, sleep. Sleep is peace.' Did she write a letter? Did she choose him? Or does the tower steal her voice?" A tear fell, swallowing the word mother in a black bloom. In that stain, a mouth moved. I would swear it, saying, "Sleep." The lamp stretched Edward's shadow thin as twine across the wall. Then the twine jerked, as if someone tugged. He stared. His own feet hadn't moved. "Did you pull?" he asked, eyes fixed on the air where I was. "If you pull till it breaks." I tried to say, "Not I," but my throat was sewn with black thread, and another voice spoke through me. "Velvet and nail? Not yet." Past midnight, he tied a strip of cloth from his brother's wrist to his own, a child's knot cinched hard. "So they won't carry him off. So I won't let go." The knot bruised both. It would not stop fleshly hands, but perhaps those without flesh. "Tower," he said. "If you must, swallow me after him." He flinched, corrected. "No, swallow me instead." He pressed the word instead until the nib stabbed through, leaving wounds and parchment. Near dawn, he slept in tatters. I kept watch, water in the walls, teeth of stone grinding faint. Steps paused at the door. A knife of light slid under and vanished. Behind me, someone drew breath. I spun, striking ice-cold stone. No one, yet frost stung my nape, as if a single drop had burned there. The spiral in my palm had darkened like old ink. 5 bruises bloomed at its edge, as from an invisible hand. When Edward woke, he looked straight through me. "You must not leave me," he said, calm with a rare steadiness. "If you go, I'll forget my name." I could not speak. I nodded, or dreamt I did. He smiled and snuffed it at once, like a candle pinched shut. In the afternoon, a new cruelty, a wooden mask shoved under the door, paint scrawled into a grin. Edward lifted it, pressed it to his face, cold, heavy, smelling of new wood and old mold. He sat a minute, then shook his head violently, tore it off and hurled it so hard it split. I heard it laugh in my ear, he gasped. It told me to say, "I am not king." He wrote instead, stabbing through paper, "I am king." He laid his hand over the rip. "Don't tear before I do," he whispered. The younger boy woke, gripping Edward's fingers. "They're coming tonight. Don't speak. Don't look." "Who?" "The one in white." Mother said, "Don't look at her face." "Mother spoke to you?" "In a dream." He coughed, a sound like rotten wood splitting. "If they come," Edward told me, "don't let me hear them." A voice thrown up from the bottom of a well. I wished I had hands to cover his ears. I had only a shadow's weight. Midnight. The chapel door quivered. A thread of white slid down the corridor like tallow flame. No steps, only fabric against stone. It did not enter by the door. It was already within, since before the room existed. I stood behind Edward, and suddenly before him, as if the tower had pushed me into a shield I could not hold. "Son," the whisper braided with prayer, "put down the pen." He gripped the journal and shook his head. "You needn't speak. Only be silent." He screamed without sound and wrote with the speed of a hand about to be severed. "The living choose. I cannot, but I still write." The page ended. He tried to turn. An unseen hand pinned the edge. The room shrank, walls folding like fingers. My bruises burned, his burned in the same pattern. For a heartbeat we lay over one another, the same small body with the same 5 marks. I heard paper fibers crackle, the sound of something about to tear. "Not tonight," he hissed through his teeth. "Not yet." The white dissolved, seeping into the floor. The door neither opened nor closed. Shadows rearranged their faces. His brother slept on, wrists bound together. The strip of cloth bit until blood bled into a single track. Edward exhaled, brow on the journal. "Tomorrow," he said, "tomorrow I'll write faster." I laid, or dreamed I laid, my palm at his nape. And for the first time, the tower did not breathe. It held its breath, like an old beast thinking. Outside, one bell tolled. Not prayer, a test. A signal to someone waiting beyond the wall. Inside is ready. Between 2 pillars, the darkness was no longer darkness but a shallow niche, just wide enough to hide a single folded page. Edward understood. So did I. Tomorrow, they would try to tear. By the second bell, he woke with wrists swollen and red beneath the knot. The little brother slept, breath sawn underwater. Edward loosened the knot. then pulled it tighter, as if confessing, "I trust nothing but this rope." He opened the journal. His hand shook, but the strokes bit deep. "They will try to tear. I must write faster." The nib ripped the sheet. His child's palms had taken on the hard red ridges of a torturer's hands, though he was the one being tortured. Later, Richard returned, nobles in tow, a scroll sealed with blood-red wax. Edward sat straight, regal by effort, though I saw the tremor in his throat beneath the crown. "Formality," Richard crooned. "A declaration that the throne shall be kept by the family. Sign, and you remain king in the people's hearts." The parchment shimmered, words shifting each time the boy blinked. Release, transfer, renounce. Many hands, many intentions. "If I sign," he asked, "does that mean I live?" Richard paused, a hairline crack in the smile. "You will be safe." "Safe," Edward whispered, palm over the journal, "is not alive." The journal creaked, hungry to keep the words he refused to give it. Buckingham arrived by afternoon. No parchment, steel instead. He bared half a blade, letting its light strike the wall. "Boy, the throne isn't for children. It stands by blood. If blood fails, the throne falls." Edward watched the steel. In his dark eyes I saw my own face, warped, bloodless. He set the journal on his knee and wrote slowly, "Which sword raises a throne? Which sword brings it down?" Buckingham laughed and sheathed the blade. "Clever boys die faster." When he'd gone, Edward yanked up his sleeve. The journal bled against his wrist. He looked straight where I stood. "Do you hear? They want blood, not words." His voice lowered. "Then I'll write with blood." He pricked his finger. A drop bloomed like a live ruby. "I am king. I live. Night." The priest again, but no prayers now. He laid beads in a circle and set a white mask in the ring. "Wear it," he said, a voice rising from crypts. "If I wear it," Edward asked, "am I still me?" "You will be everything," the smile said. "King. Ghost. Silence. If I am silent, who writes the last page?" The priest had no answer. He pushed the mask closer. Candles died at once, leaving the mask to glow like an open mouth. Edward scratched. "Tonight I choose words, not masks." The nib shredded the paper, leaving wounds. Near dawn his brother woke choking. Edward seized him, and for one flash his look was half love, half madness. "If you betray me, the tower will swallow you first," he whispered, then broke, sobbing. "No, no, you won't. Only the tower betrays." I felt the cold truth of it. Love and lunacy now separated by a breath. Many leaves were already missing from the journal. On a torn half that remained, the hand shook. Mother chose him, not me. Blood smudged into the print of a small hand. I touched it, my fingertips burned. Edward gave a small, cracked laugh. "You've been abandoned too?" I kept silence. In his eyes I was no longer a shadow at his back, but a companion locked in the tower with him, and without escape. The last night of this chapter, the coin with the grinning demon face rolled from the dark again. Edward caught it, held it to the candle. The grin it wore was, "God help us," his. "If I keep it, I live," he whispered. "If I throw it away, my brother dies." "Is that it?" No one answered. He closed his fist until blood soaked the coin's rim. In that moment I understood. Edward had stopped merely recording truth. The tower was bending him, and he was becoming the shape of its truth. He stared straight at me, eyes deep as a well. "Have you been behind me from the start?" I could not breathe. In his pupils, I saw my own face, not as a narrator, but as a man with 5 purple bruises printed like a hand upon his throat. The tower would not be content with swallowing Edward. It wanted me as well. The walls that speak. The night after the chains dragged, the tower ceased to be a fortress and became a ribcage, a giant chest breathing out currents of cold air that smelled of the long dead. Edward sat curled on the plank bed, eyes wide and glassed, and for the first time he heard them. Not guards' boots, not the chapel bell. A sound as slight as a throttled breath exhaled through the seams of stone. A man's voice, low, each syllable drawn out like a needle pushed straight into the brain. "You are no king. You are a child abandoned. Your father betrayed. Your mother did too. Your brother will not live." Edward flinched so violently his face blanched. He pressed his ear to the wall, his small hand trembling on the stone as if searching for a pulse within it. His lips parted, but no sound came. He lurched backward and struck a stool. Its screams scored the silence. Then the journal sprang open. He scrawled, "There is a voice in the wall. It knows me. It knows everything I fear." The handwriting sloped and zagged, shoved by invisible wind, the lines slanting downhill toward the paper's edge. Ink blurred, staining his fingers. Standing behind him, I knew this could be human artifice. Holes drilled thin as needles, a hollow reed, a priest or guard whispering through the masonry all night long. A quiet, persistent torture. Yet something was wrong. The voice did not echo from a single point, but from layers of stone, as if the wall itself were speaking truth. The next night the sound was not a single voice. It became a crooked choir. A woman's whisper, cradle soft, "You have no right to sit a throne. You are but the bastard of a liaison." Then a rasping voice, overlapping, "Choose if you wish to live. Betray your brother. Alone, you will be spared." Edward clapped his hands to his ears and shouted, "Be silent." The cry punched the vaulted stone. It made my skin crawl. Only his brother heard. The boy blinked in confusion and asked, weakly, "What is it, brother?" Edward bent at once, cradled him, and murmured, "Nothing. Sleep." But in his eyes I saw not the calm of a child soothed, but a smoldering flare. The moment one understands he is being fed into a game where death and treachery are wrapped in every syllable. Next day the guards brought food. No words. They set the tray, pivoted, and marched away, motions stiff, marionette straight. Edward watched through narrowed eyes, dissecting each flicker of expression. One guard glanced, and then looked away. Edward wrote, "They know. They listen. Perhaps they are the whisperers." His hand paused. His mouth thinned. Then, smaller letters beneath. "Or not them." That line chilled me. A 12-year-old had grasped what grown men fear too. Not all voices are made by men. The tower was no longer stone and chain, but a machine of memory where the blood and bone of the dead had been strung into strings, and the living were the bow. On the 6th night the whispers changed places. They no longer seeped from the wall, but rose from Edward's pillow. When he lowered his head, a cold breath spoke into the shell of his ear. "You will never leave, but you may choose. Be silent and die quickly, or speak truth and die slowly." Edward bolted upright, lungs scalded, eyes burning. His hand shook, but the pen ran. "They want me to choose, but only the living choose. The dead do not." The nib carved the page like a blade, scoring the skin of the paper. Ink spattered the margins, slicking his skin, mixing with blood when his bitten lip gave way. The sentence darkened, wine brown, as if history were being written in the child's own blood. At dawn his brother could scarcely rise. Lips split by thirst, hands quivering like willow twigs. Edward fed him spoon by spoon, gaze tauter than any king at court. But once the boy's eyes closed, Edward turned to the wall and whispered, "Be quiet. I won't hear you." The wall answered at once, its voice tearing through stone cracks. "You have heard. You cannot forget. You will repeat." I shuddered. Not a threat, an axiom. Once a whisper lodges in the mind, it becomes memory, becomes you, and cannot be washed away. That night, Edward refused the journal. He took a shard of stone and carved straight into the wall. Blood welled from his fingers and dragged as living ink. A wavering line scored itself into the face of tower. I was king once. I stood so near I could smell the brine of sweat in the iron tang of blood, could see each letter open like a wound. This was not confession, it was indictment. A 12-year-old chiseled into rock the truth that chronicles would later bury. When he sagged, panting, his gaze flared with a new comprehension. The tower did not merely confine. It drank. It swallowed breath by breath, drop by salted drop, letter by letter. In that second, Edward understood he was not battling only an uncle, a duke, a priest. He was facing the tower's shadow, grown fat on centuries of betrayed souls. Drop of blood from then on, the tower's walls became a mouth. Each night they did not just whisper, they commanded, seduced, sowed guilt. On the 7th night, the tower altered its voice. No more scattered murmurs, but a full and ghastly chorus. From the stones, the vault, the very floor, dozens, hundreds of voices rose together. Men, women, children, guards, nobles, all conjoined into a grinding surge like surf pounding a chest, pouring directly into Edward's ear. "Choose. Quick or slow. Betrayal or loyalty. Your blood, or your brother's?" Edward clamped his ears and shook his head hard, but the sound threaded the bone. His brother stirred, coughed, and whispered, "Brother, what is it?" Edward did not answer. He dragged the pen and wrote, hand quaking, "If I choose, I betray. If I do not choose, my brother dies. I do not want to choose." Before the ink dried, a laugh broke from the wall, syllable by syllable. "Not choosing is a choice. You have chosen to let him wither in your stead." I saw Edward's hand go slack. The pen fell and scored a long, slashing line like a cut across the page. He looked at his brother, horror in his eyes, as though asking whether he had already become a murderer. When the uproar ebbed, another voice rose, so gentle and familiar that Edward sobbed at once. A lullaby. "Sleep, child, sleep this happy night. Sleep, and in the morning there'll be no pain." His mother's voice, but the sweetness tipped downward, hardened into a funeral hymn. "Sleep, my child, this will be the last. Sleep, and let the crown fall to another's hand." Edward shook as though struck, sank to his knees by the bed, struck his head against the pillow, whispering, "Mother, no. Mother would not say that." The lullaby went on, as heavy as a rope tightening. I pressed my ear to the wall with him, and my heart iced over, for I heard it too. The tower was using his mother's memory to choke him. He scarcely spoke the next day. He sat before the journal and wrote, erased, wrote, tore. Once I watched him write Edward, and when he looked again, the page read only Richard. Another time he wrote brother, and the ink bled outward into sacrifice. The sentences no longer belonged to his hand. The paper and pen had been taken, made instruments to warp the truth. By evening he barked a laugh, hoarse and wrong in any child's throat. "If the book betrays me," he hissed, "I'll carve the stone." He seized a broken brick and cut new lines. His fingers split and bled, but he scratched on, letters mingling with wounds. "The living may choose. The dead do not. I have no right. But I will record, so that history remembers me." Each stroke landed like a chain dragged across stone. I heard it with him, and for a moment my own hand burned. Blood pricked and beaded there. I could not tell if it was mine or Edward's. Near midnight, the wall's voice became a father's voice, tender as it had been in life. "My son, do not resist. Let the throne drift. Let your blood be spared. I failed. Now you may rest." Edward choked on a cry and struck his palm against the floor. "Father, if I yield, they win. If I am silent, history will keep only the killer's name." His father's voice laughed, hollow as a grave. "History belongs to the victor, son. You are a line crossed out." Laughter echoed through the stones and joined the groaning of 1,000 souls. Edward screamed back, clutched his brother, hands shaking. "No, I will leave the truth behind. I swear it." He raked the page to shreds, blood and ink flooding together, and wrote a final line. "If anyone reads this, know I did not choose. I left only this blood." He collapsed, gasping. His brother slept in a fevered coma, breath fine as silk. In the dark, the whispering pulled tight into a single sentence, long as a chain. "The last page will never belong to you." Standing just behind him, I felt it plainly. Not only Edward was imprisoned, I was too. The whispers had learned my name and poured themselves into my ear. When I looked upon the torn leaf, I saw my own handwriting there, warped, blood-smeared. The tower would not be satisfied with swallowing the boy. It had opened its mouth for me. The tower's hunger did not pause with Edward's collapse. That night its silence was worse than the whispers, for silence was only the tower holding its breath, deciding where next to bite. Edward dozed in broken fragments of sleep. Each time his head fell, I felt him jerk as though an unseen hand tugged his hair. Beside him his younger brother whimpered in fevered dreams, lips shaping words too faint for even prayer. Their wrists were still bound with the childish knot of cloth, both boys tethered together like lambs waiting at the altar. I thought I saw the cloth move, not pulled by either child, but tightening of its own will, the knot shrinking like a noose. I reached out, though I had no hand, and willed it to slacken. For a moment the cord quivered, loosened. Edward stirred, eyes flickering open. He whispered, "You stayed. Good. If you leave, I'll forget my name." His lips curved in the ghost of a smile, then stilled as though even that small warmth had been stolen. At dawn the guards returned, their boots echoing in mechanical cadence. One held a bucket of water, clear and glistening. He set it down just inside the cell, then looked at Edward long enough for a message to pass, a warning or a promise. When Edward reached for the bucket, a drop of crimson floated on the surface, widening like a wound. He recoiled, shoved it away with his foot, and wrote furiously, "Even water is not water here. Even thirst is a trap." The guards closed the door without a word. But in the echo of the latch I swore I heard laughter, deep, amused, and human. By the second night the tower grew bolder. Whispers no longer hid in the walls. They coiled visibly in the air, black threads rising like smoke from the cracks in the floor. They circled Edward's cot, curling under his arms, across his mouth. One thread slipped into the open journal, and the pages turned without hands. The words bled red of their own accord. "Choose your crown or his life. There is no third." Edward hurled the book away, but the pages flapped like wings, striking the floor and opening again. He seized the shard of brick and carved into stone once more, voice shaking. "I will not choose. I will leave the truth even if it kills me." The walls quivered, dust falling like ash. The tower had heard. The next day a visitor came. Not Richard, not Buckingham, not priest. A woman in plain dress, veiled, escorted by guards who refused to meet Edward's gaze. She stepped into the half-light and removed her veil. Edward froze. "Mother." Her face was pale, drawn, but her eyes were clear. She lifted a hand, not to touch, only to point at the journal. "Write no more," she said softly. "Each word you carve feeds the tower. Silence is mercy for you and your brother." Edward stumbled forward, clutching at the air. "You chose him. You begged Richard, did you not? You traded us for your own peace." Tears welled in her eyes, but whether of shame or pity I could not tell. "My son," she whispered. "The tower twists all voices, perhaps even mine." She turned to leave. Guards closed around her, and when Edward cried out, "Mother!" the sound cracked his throat. The woman was gone, as though she had been no more than smoke conjured to torment him. Edward collapsed onto his knees, beating his fists against the cold floor until blood speckled the stone. "If even she is a ghost," he rasped, "then who remains real?" That night the tower answered him, not with voices, with footsteps, light, deliberate, pacing in a circle around the cell. Yet no figure showed. Edward rose and spun, clutching his brother, eyes wide. The steps halted at the foot of the cot. Then a child's giggle bubbled from the dark. Edward's own laugh echoed back at him. He screamed, "I am Edward. I am not your echo," and smashed his head against the wall until the sound ceased. When he sagged down, I saw blood streak his hairline. He gripped the journal again, scrawling with broken lines, "The tower wants my name. If I lose it, I vanish. Remember me." The ink blurred. His plea was not to history, not to God, but to me. By the seventh dawn, the tower's malice had seeped into me as well. I felt its cold fingers pressing into my back, shaping my breath. When I gazed at the wall, I thought I saw my own reflection within the cracks, my face warped, pallid, mouth sewn shut. And in that reflection, Edward stood beside me, identical scars across his wrists. I understood then. The tower was weaving us together. He and I, prisoner and witness, living and recording, past and present. We were one body split into two shadows, both destined to be consumed. Edward opened the journal once more and scratched the final line of that night. "The tower will not take my voice. If it takes me, it must take you too." The words cut deep into the page, gouging it nearly through. The tower's stones groaned. I felt them vibrate through my skull. And I knew, from this night on, I was not only a narrator. I was bound to Edward, bound to his blood, and bound to a tower that was still very, very hungry. The mask and the broken mirror. The tower did not sleep. When night fell, the walls no longer whispered. They were silent in a way more terrifying, as though preparing for a new performance. Edward lay stiff beside his brother, eyes wide and unblinking. The boy had learned to hold his breath to listen to the dark, but it was silence itself that pressed the air into stone and crushed our chests. Then, from the corridor, came the sound of footsteps. Not the harsh iron strike of soldiers, but a soft dragging, cloth-brushing stone. The door creaked open. The priest entered, carrying something strange, a white mask, eyeless, mouthless. He placed it on the table, beside Edward's journal. "Wear it," he murmured, his voice a blend of prayer and metal breath. "When you wear it, the voices in the walls will cease. You will be at peace." Edward stared at the mask, black eyes widening. I felt his yearning, his desperate wish for the torment to stop. But when his small fingers brushed the surface, a chill raced down my spine. It was not wood, nor plaster. It was like skin, scrubbed clean. "If I wear it," Edward rasped, "will I still be myself?" The priest smiled faintly. "You will be everything. A king, a ghost, a silence." Edward clutched the journal to his chest. "If I am silent, who will write the last page?" A glimmer lit the priest's eyes. Then he retrieved the mask and turned away. As the door closed behind him, the darkness thickened. The game had only shifted. At dawn, guards brought in a basin of water. They said it was for washing. But the water was not clear. It shimmered with a dull gray, reflecting the vaulted ceiling in crooked shapes. Edward bent over it. For the first time in days he saw his own face. Pale, hollow-eyed, lips split and dry. But when he blinked, the reflection did not. It smiled. A thin, crooked smile that stretched too far, showing yellowed teeth, Buckingham's teeth. Edward recoiled, stumbling back. The water rippled, yet the reflection kept grinning. He seized the journal, scrawling. I saw another me. It smiled. I leaned over the basin, and my heart stuttered. Not only Edward appeared there. I did too. But in the reflection, I did not stand behind him. I stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. And my face was hollow, eyeless. That night Edward could not sleep. He set the basin by his cot, lit a candle, and stared. This time the reflection moved independently. "You write too much," it said. Edward's mouth in the real world did not move. "Who are you?" Edward whispered. "I am you, unbroken. I am the one who survives." Edward shook his head. "If survival means betrayal, then you are not me." The reflection smiled wider, holding out a pale child's hand. "If you kill your brother, you will live. You will be chosen. The last page will be yours." Edward screamed, "Be silent," and upended the basin. Water splashed across the floor, extinguishing the candle. Darkness fell, and in it, I heard laughter. Not from the water, from just behind me. The next day the tower brought a mirror, old, framed in chipped wood. They claimed it was for royal grooming. I knew better. Edward stood before it, gazing. The glass cracked almost instantly. From the fractures seeped blood, spreading across the surface. His reflection warped into something older. Hollow cheeks, bloodshot eyes, lips torn. An Edward who had rotted 10 years in stone, or an Edward already dead. The reflection smiled. "You could become me, if you wished. Only one small choice." Edward hurled his fist at the mirror. Shards exploded, one lodging in his hand. Blood spilled, staining the open journal. Without a pen, words bloomed across the page. "I am king. I will die as a king, but I will not betray." I shivered. In the shard at my feet, I saw my own face, but eyeless, black sockets where sight should be. Edward sat on the floor, bleeding hand clutching his brother. "They want me to wear the mask. They want me to betray. They want me to become the grin in the water. But I will not." He dipped his finger into his own blood and wrote, "If the last page is torn, know that I saw another self in the glass. Trust this child, not the reflection." When the final line closed, the journal turned a page on its own. In my skull, I heard the whisper. "It was you who wrote this, not him." The following night, the mask returned. No one opened the door. It simply appeared, lying cold upon Edward's pillow. Edward flinched. "I refused you." The mask slid from the cot to the floor. It rolled, slowly, deliberately, to my feet. I looked down. Its hollow sockets were no longer empty. They contained my own face, pale and trembling, trapped behind the porcelain. Edward buried his face in his hands. "If I wear it, perhaps the voices will end. But if I wear it, I will never write again." He clutched his brother close, muttering like prayer, "Don't let them make me silence." Later, when a rare shaft of light entered through the slit window, Edward picked up a shard of mirror. He tried to smile at his brother. "See, we are still ourselves." But in the shard it was not two children reflected. It was one Edward, gaunt and older, strangling his sibling with blood-stained hands. Edward shrieked, making his brother cry. He smashed the shard against the wall. Yet, even in ruin, the sound of laughter lingered in both our minds. I glanced at my own hand and recoiled. My fingers curled, unbidden, as if closing around a child's throat. I let go, horrified, not knowing whether the urge was mine, Edward's, or the tower's. That night, Edward filled a page with blood and ink, nearly carving through the parchment. They show me another self, a betrayer, a fratricide, but that is not me. If I vanish, remember, the shadow in the glass one, not the child who writes. The words skewed and bled. When I looked down, my own palms were stained too, though I swore I had never touched the pen. At dawn, Edward sat unmoving. The mask lay before him again. The shards of glass shimmered with different Edwards, one innocent and weeping, one youth with bloody hands, one faceless shadow grinning. His brother wheezed, clutching his sleeve, "Don't let them divide us." Edward wept. "I will not betray. I will not wear it. I will not kill." Yet beneath his vow, the air itself whispered, "You will. You will." I pressed my hand to the wall, ice burning into my flesh. I realized the tower was no longer testing Edward alone. It was dragging me into the play, erasing the line between witness and victim. Before sleep claimed him, Edward scrawled a final line. "If the last page is torn, remember, I saw my other self in the glass. But the truth that I did not betray will remain in stone, in blood, in anyone who listens." He fell asleep, clutching his brother. The wind howled through the slit window, rattling the mask on the table. It trembled, smiling without lips. And I, standing behind him, felt the heavy weight of unseen hands lifting the mask, ready to place it upon my face. The invisible hand. On the 10th night in the tower, the candle burned low, its flame no brighter than an animal's eye gleaming in the corner. The sickly light stretched Edward's small shadow across the stone wall, trembling like a soul strung between life and death. His younger brother lay on the bed, coughing so hard that flecks of blood bloomed red against the pillow. Edward sat rigid at the table, his tiny back stiff, the journal spread wide before him. His hand scrawled furiously, letters slanting like they were whipped by storm winds. He hasn't much time left. They know. They are waiting. Ink smeared across his fingers, pooling beneath his nails, but he gripped the quill as if letting go would allow the truth itself to fall from the world. There were no clanking chains tonight, no whispers in the walls, only silence. But the silence was heavier than shackles, thicker than the choir of dead voices. Edward froze when something cold pressed upon his shoulder. It was not wind, not a blanket, a hand, small, yet heavy as stone. I felt it too, an invisible grip sinking into my own bones. Edward turned his head and saw nothing. His eyes gleamed wet with terror. He scribbled into the journal with trembling strokes. Someone touched me, not my brother, not the living. He tugged his collar down, and I recoiled. 5 bruises bloomed on his pale skin, the clear mark of a hand. Proof. Not dream, not madness, proof. His brother stirred, pupils clouded, whispering in a strangled child's voice. "Brother, who's standing there?" Edward forced a smile, desperate to soothe, but the boy's gaze was fixed on the corner. I followed it and saw a shadow, thicker than night, taller than any guard, faceless. Only its hands were visible, impossibly long, fingers curved like hooks, waiting for the moment to pull. Edward clutched his brother close, crying out, "No!" But the figure did not move. It only waited, patient as a silent judge. The next morning, a guard brought a bowl of white porridge. Edward stared at it, pushing it toward his brother. The child shook his head, lips blackening, eyes glazed. Edward wrote, "Food itself is an invisible hand. It kills from within." He understood. Their deaths would never come by sword, never by poison alone, but by careful design. Each drop of water, each spoon of porridge, hooks pulling their souls away under the disguise of illness. A clean death on paper, filthy in truth. That night, Edward placed his journal on the table, then carved into the wall with a shard of brick. I do not choose. I only record. Blood seeped from his fingers with each stroke. The bed shook violently. His brother convulsed, coughing blood. From beneath the frame, I saw them, blackened hands crawling out, scratching grooves across the stone floor. Edward dragged his brother back up, holding him tight, yet with his other trembling hand he still wrote, messy and desperate. Hands beneath the bed. They want to drag us away. Each morning, the marks multiplied. On the window's damp glass, a child's handprint appeared, but its fingers were too long, twisted wrong. On Edward's neck, fresh bruises bloomed. Another grip, another squeeze. On his brother's forehead, a faint circular mark glowed like a brand. And the tower itself whispered, "No sword, no poison. We have hands." Edward's writing turned frantic, clipped, each line like a spell. Hand on my shoulder, hand beneath the bed, hand on my neck. I still live. But I knew the cruel truth. The tower needed no weapons. It turned the boy's own body into parchment. Every bruise, every cut, every scar, its signatures. A witness made of flesh, easier to tear than paper. On the 11th night, the younger brother whispered, "Brother, someone is holding me." Edward sobbed, hugging him tighter. But I saw it. Bruises forming all around the boy's frail body. The marks of giant hands squeezing, invisible to most eyes, yet burning red against the skin. Edward screamed silently, then wrote one last line before the ink blurred. "If I vanish, know the hands pulled us away." On the 12th night, a gale screamed through the cracks. The bed rattled like a coffin lid. Claw marks gouged the floor. Edward held his brother in one arm, the journal in the other. But when his quill touched the page, something else seized it. The quill moved on its own, letters jerking across the parchment. R. Edward fought it, but the strokes dragged on. B. Ink sprayed like blood. "Brother," the younger gasped. "Who is writing?" Edward could not answer. He only clutched him tighter, clutching the journal too. "Richard. Buckingham." Names sharp as knives in history. But the tower was cunning enough to twist truth into lies. Were these accusations, or illusions designed to destroy? The next morning, a bloody handprint spread across the wall, the 5 fingers bent into an inverted cross. Edward placed his own palm against it. It matched perfectly. He whispered into the journal, "The wall writes for me." But I did not write. By the 13th night, the window fog bore another inverted hand, its palm marked with a spiral. Edward touched it. Instantly, another bruise spiraled across his neck. The tower had branded him. He collapsed, writing weakly. "There are hands. There are signs. But no answers. Who will believe me?" The ink spread into a black pool. I knew what the tower desired. Not his immediate death, but his discredit. To leave him a mad boy scribbling delusions, his testimony dismissed. When the final page was torn, all that remained would be insanity. Still, Edward resisted. He carved into the wall with bloodied fingers. Not a dream. The hands are real. Then whispered, "If I vanish, let the bruises speak for me." And when I looked at my own shoulder, I froze. A fresh bruise. 5 purple marks, identical to his. The tower was signing me too. By the 14th night, Edward startled awake. He turned toward the wall, but the whisper came not from the stones. It came from his brother's lips. The boy slept soundly, eyes closed, but his mouth moved, voicing words not his own. "The crown is too heavy. Drop it. Drop me." Edward recoiled, shaking him. "Stop. Don't let them use you." But terror gleamed in his eyes, not only of the shadow, but of his own blood. The next day, Edward sat hunched for hours, biting his quill, sweat dripping from his tangled hair. Finally, he scrawled, "Perhaps I am the hand. Perhaps I sleep. I dream. I write without knowing. I hold my brother, and yet he bears bruises. If it is me." The letters faltered, the ink bled like blood. He tore the page, crumpled it, and shoved it into a crack in the wall. I glimpsed the words before they vanished. "If I am the murderer, who will forgive me?" A 12-year-old boy, already made to carry the weight of a killer. The 15th night, the tower trembled like a beast stirring. Edward clutched his brother, writing wildly. Some hand is choking him, but I see my own handprint on his throat. Am I the monster? He dropped the quill, clutching his head, and burst into manic laughter. If I am the shadow, why keep writing? The laugh was no child's laugh. It was a man's rasp. In the candlelight, his face warped, 2 faces layered as one, a trembling boy and a grown specter. I looked at my own hands. Blood seeped from my fingertips, forming the same marks. I no longer knew whose hands were truly strangling him. The tower's, Edward's, or mine. The tower was erasing the line. The 16th day, guards brought water. Edward stared at the jug, then whispered to me, "If I drink, he lives. If he drinks, I live. You choose." The question struck me silent, for it was not written in his journal. It was spoken straight into my ear. I did not know whether I was still only the witness or now a player. The 17th night, Edward muttered endlessly, staring at his hands. "This is my hand. This is the tower's hand. This is your hand." He slammed it against the wall, leaving a smear of blood. The stain spiraled into the same mark as before. His brother, half conscious, murmured with a weak smile, "You draw so well, brother. But it is a trap." Edward bit his lip until blood welled, holding him close. In his eyes I saw it. The seed of madness had rooted. Rain battered the tower on the 18th day. Drops leaked through the window, falling like a heartbeat. Edward listened for hours, then wrote, "Water itself is a hand. It taps the rhythm of our burial." His brother whispered, "I hear someone counting with it." I strained my ears, and yes, each drip answered by another knock, as if someone beneath the floor was drumming time for a grave. The 19th night, Edward dreamed of mirrors. In every mirror he saw himself, hands drenched in blood, cradling his brother's corpse. He screamed, but the reflection laughed. When he awoke, sweat-soaked, his brother still breathed faintly beside him, but on the sheets lay fresh blood, in the shape of a small hand. Dream or truth, it no longer mattered. By the 20th day, his writing spiraled into madness. Not lines, but circles, tighter and tighter, like ropes around a throat. The last mark closed into an O, a perfect ring. Then ink spread like a black hole. His brother wheezed, "Don't write, brother. The hand is guiding you." Edward flung the quill away, yet it still scratched across the paper, turning half a circle more. That night, he whispered, "If I am the hand, cut it off. If not, I'll kill him myself." He raised a shard of stone, ready to strike his own wrist. I lunged forward, but stopped, for I wasn't sure I existed. "Stop!" I screamed inside my mind. Edward looked up, straight at me. "You're not sure either, are you?" he whispered. "You fear your own hand." I looked down. My hands were red with blood, dripping. I no longer knew if they were mine or his. On the 20th night, Edward wrote his final words, trembling. "If I vanish, the hand pulled me. But the hand may be Richard, or Buckingham, or the church, or the tower, or my brother, or me, or you. Whoever reads must choose." The quill snapped. Blood mixed with ink. His brother collapsed, gasping. The tower shivered, chuckling dryly. And I understood. The line was gone. The invisible hand was real. It could be anyone, everyone. A mark, a bruise, a stain of blood. And when the final page was torn, the hand would still remain, dragging us all into the abyss. The grown men's game. Outside the tower, the grown-ups were laying out their chessboard as if no child were gasping for air in a stone room. I stood behind Edward, the chill of the invisible hand still printed on his shoulder, and through the narrow slit of a window we heard the city change key. Church bells drawn long, iron-shod hooves knocking at the wet cobbles, knots of people gathering, and rumors drifting like smoke along the Thames. The first rumor struck tinder at dawn. The council would consider the legality of the bloodline, an elegant way to raise a paper wall and declare the two children in the tower no longer the truth of the throne. Adults called it a fine thing, a work of parchment, a statute to be quoted by posterity. To me it sounded like the tearing of a last page before it had been written. Edward sat very still, one hand on his notebook, where a wash of ink still stained the margin into two grotesque letters from the night before, R and B. He looked up when the guard changed. The new man bore a crescent scar across his left cheek, eyes the color of old ice, a gait that seemed not to touch the ground. And, as ever, the dark between the twin pillars opened like an unseen eye looking straight at the boy's throat. The next whisper came sheathed in velvet. Richard would be crowned for the stability of the realm. Buckingham had fallen silent, silence being the most dangerous posture for a man who usually made his meaning by noise. A young servant, softer-hearted than the rest, slid the tray toward the bed and chirped like a sparrow caught in rain. "They'll read a law. You needn't understand it. Only that it turns you into a shadow." He vanished as if he had never come, leaving the smell of cold porridge and the confusion of having been both rescued and sold in one breath. Edward did not touch the spoon. He raised a hand to his brow, where last night's handprint bruise had darkened, and in his eyes burned the light that kindles when a child discovers he's been deceived, yet must pretend to be good. I leaned closer, not to comfort, but to read with him the invisible word the adults were writing across his body, non-existent. At noon, the church across the river told 3 slow strokes out of season. Whispers traveled through stone. They have the signatures. The gentlemen have agreed. A new style will be read to the crowd. In the passage, a pack of dark-robed men swept by, swift and hushed. They did not look toward the cell, but I saw a puck of red wax gleam in the middle man's hand, the same shade as the dried blood stippling our room. Edward pressed his ear to iron and listened to the argument beyond. I said smooth, no fuss. You cannot keep it smooth, my lord. The boy writes. He carves on the wall. Then tear. That easy word, tear, struck the ribs like a hammer. No need to murder memory if you can destroy the vessel that holds it. Let bells and paperwork sanctify the rest. By evening, rain slanted through the slit window, the air heavy with river mud and stone moss. A crow settled on the sill and cocked its head to peer in. Its eyes were bead black, and for a moment I fancied the beak spoke, not in a bird's rasp but in the blended voices of men deciding from afar. Stability, order, an end to rumor, clean words, cold as surgical steel. Edward drew the book and wrote. They love clean words, but their shoes are dirty. I might have smiled at the child's sharpness, but there was no time. Filthy shoes were already scuffing outside the door, and someone rapped twice with the flat of a sword, a rhythm you cannot mistake, a signal. The door cracked. The gray-eyed guard with the crescent scar filled the gap. Behind him a dark robe, incense steeped in old wine, and a voice we knew too well, the priest. He did not step fully in. He stood where candlelight ended so that half his face belonged to shadow. My son, he murmured, his tone mixed from prayer and metal, last chance. You shall be taken to a safer place. Only a confession. One line. Edward raised his chin, the briefest echo of his dead father. I will not lie. The priest sighed, sainthood framing the breath, then nodded at the guard. Right. The child is not yet clear of mind. Not yet clear of mind. They wielded that phrase like a stiletto, puncturing a witness so his voice could be filed as delirium. On paper they were already converting silence into evidence against the silenced. That night the grown men revealed more of their hidden pieces. From the river came the kiss of oars, not fishing boats, but quick, shallow craft for men who dislike front doors. I heard metal kiss metal, a muttered French, a short laugh, then hush. Beyond the wall a small gate opened. A breath of cold ran the passage. Someone had come to visit the tower, not to pray. Near dawn a coarse bundle was carried along the corridor, quiet as a shadow, neat on 2 shoulders. If their wet soles hadn't squealed, we might have sworn it was the wind. Edward didn't see, but I did. When the bundle passed, a dark wetness seeped and left a stain like ink. A few drops spattered the sill. The crow hissed and sprang, cleaving a black notch in the air. Morning grew a new crop of rumor. Buckingham had borrowed soldiers from somewhere. Richard gathered fresh oaths. The church climbed bell towers to seed its warnings. Tudor's men slipped letters into the hands of ladies at their windows. Each scrap a tooth in a comb smoothing the public's hair. And in the damp stone room, a child recorded with a split nib. Edward began listing, not crimes, but looks. Richard, wolf eyes, soft hands. Buckingham, mouth smiling, hand trembles near steel. Priest, wine under the vestments. Gray-eyed guard, crescent scar, left foot drags a touch. Crow, bead eyes, keeps the bell's hours. He underlined crow twice and glanced toward me, not quite at me, as if he felt a witness standing behind. Even the birds learn their hours, he murmured. Only we don't know ours. That afternoon came what I would later remember as a rescue staged to fail. A young guard, bloodless face, eyes darting back, skittered a thin roll of parchment beneath Edward's blanket. When the boy uncurled it, 3 hurried words scratched the skin. Tonight, Northgate. Edward's heart raced. For an instant he was like any other child. Doors can still open. Somewhere, someone is good. But the tower had already taught him doubt. He looked to me as if to ask. I, who could not touch the world but could read its games, did not answer. In such rooms, any answer can turn into the trap. Night fell thick as sifted flour in the passage. We moved along the wall. His little brother pressed close, breathing shallow as thread. The north gate sat at the hall's end, beneath a saint's statue rubbed smooth by centuries, and the sound of water seeping through stone. No guards, no chains, only an opening of darkness, dark so dense it seemed to have a smell. Edward set his fingers to the bar. Cold. A gentle push. A dry click. Fire flared on both sides as if palms had been waiting to clap. Armor surged out of the dark. A hand took Edward by the collar and lifted him like a snared fawn. His brother went to his knees, breath chopped into pieces. From the shadow, the priest's voice oiled forth. "My son, you have chosen." It was not rescue. It was a stress test. When the victim reaches for the false door, they earn the signature for the record. Unstable, strengthen watch, increase the dose of prayer. Adults excel at renaming. They call the snare a trial, terror salvation, ripping correction. Somewhere a quill scratched fast and dry like a claw across rock. After that pageant, the tower changed seasons, not the years, but the season of the game. From the next day, Edward's meals changed. Thinner, paler, the medicine's tang less obvious, so suspicion could not take root. The guard rotations went crooked. No more gray-eyed man lingering too long, replaced by blank stares that looked through us. The priest vanished for 3 days, then returned with a new gospel. He pressed no confession now. He preached the mercy of deserved rest. He told stories of other children in history who slept sweetly, who were entered somewhere, the place of entry left prudently unnamed. Buckingham, via his own channels, sent messages slick as suet. If you keep quiet long enough, the storm will pass. Quiet long enough, another way to say dead. Across the river, fishmongers still cried their wares. Wives beat linen on the steps and stamped their feet against the cold. They repeated the morning's line. "You've heard, haven't you? It's all been written now. Everything is clean." From his blur of window, Edward watched a boat slide by and wrote, "Clean speaks to sleeves, not hands." He closed the book and pressed it to his chest, the way you press a coal to your breastbone for warmth. In him I saw a stubborn fire. In the grown men, a patient cruelty. They understood waiting. They knew how to let the tower do the rest. That night the shadow did not enter the room. It stood at the door like an honor guard at a coronation, set to watch the final gate. I heard the river rise, tide under the tower, and the graze of a ship along the half-submerged wall. The tower quivered, arranging itself for a larger rite. In Edward's wrist the pulse ran fast. The bruise at his throat drew an extra ring. The letters R and B dried darker, twin eyes that would not shut. I understood then that the chapter of grown men was not only their deals outside, but the way they adjusted the breath inside this room. One more prayer, one less cup of milk, a new guard, a nail withdrawn from the bed, small things, and the groan will never quite form. Before the last candle guttered, Edward lifted his face and asked very softly, as if asking himself, and also asking me, "Do they ever touch the pen?" A child's question, terribly shrewd. I wanted to say yes. History's victors always touch the pen, but I could not answer. He tucked the book into his shirt and leaned his head against the wall. Behind the stone, grown men laughed. Glasses clicked. A neat little sentence dropped. Step 1 is done. A draft from the slit blew hard and put the room to black. In that well of dark, I felt the invisible hand return to Edward's shoulder and mine. Not squeezing, merely resting, as if to say, not yet. There are steps after this. And I knew the adult's game had just begun in earnest, and the child still only a child, would have to write faster than they could tear. After the failed farce at the north gate, the tower's air shifted for good. I heard hurried feet in the corridor, thin quarrels cut short when bells rolled. Richard no longer bothered with veils. Rumors pounded. He would be crowned, quick and cold as a cut. Buckingham went mute, which is when men do their most thinking. The priest changed vestments again, this time a red so deep he called it the blood of Christ. Inside this cell it looked exactly like the blood from Edward's brother's pillow. Edward heard everything, not with ears, but with eyes. He wrote, "Grown men use color to hide. They call red God. I see blood." The sentence lay on the page like a judgment from a child magistrate. Before the ink had dried, the wall breathed a whisper. "You wear red too. Only a little more is needed." Outside, Their game moved to a new round. Buckingham sent letters to tempt lords toward revolt. Richard sent men to cut them down. Letters were intercepted. Signatures vanished into the river. People murmured that some were dragged to the water, feet tied to stone, and never rose. The tower recorded by other means. Each time someone died, a section of our wall sweated. The moss spread like blood wicking through cloth. I saw it. Edward saw it and wrote, "The tower knows. It drinks news as it drinks blood." One afternoon, when a meal came, Edward noticed a faint mar in the gruel. Not poison, not blood, letters. A few grains had clumped into the shape of an R. He would not eat. He scratched onto paper. "They seed letters into food. They want me to read." This was no accident. The grown men were turning the boy's mouth into an interrogation, every bite a syllable planted in his mind. That night the tower shuddered. Dust fell into Edward's hair. He grabbed the bed and held his brother, panting. The dark at the door arrived again, taller now, and this time it took one step into the room. Edward trembled, bit his lip, and carved into the wall, "You shall not come in." The invisible hand had already set itself on the younger boy's chest. The child buckled and coughed, flinging a ribbon of red. "Stop!" Edward shouted. Then, savage over his shoulder on the page, "They call it politics outside. I know it is a demon." Next day the priest came with a great roll stamped in red. He read to Edward, "By resolution, the crown pertains to Richard, for this child lacks title." His voice was even. Each word a stone dropped into a well. Edward's eyes flamed. He wrote one line, "I retain title because I still write." The priest smiled faintly. "The last page is not yours," he said, and turned away, laying the roll on the table like a shroud set in advance. Toward dusk, word seeped through that Tudor across the sea had sent a sign. Londoners murmured in the markets. Perhaps things would turn, perhaps Richard would not keep long. Such breezes slipped into the tower and licked Edward's ear. "If outside changes," he whispered, "will we be saved?" I looked at him and knew the answer was no. The tower does not care who sits the throne. It requires only victims. And now the victims were two children. On the 14th night, Edward opened the book again. His hand shook, but the letters were hard and clear. "They play their game with my blood. I play mine with words. They will tear. I will write. Who is quicker?" The question rang in my skull. The true contest was not outside but here. One side tearing, one side writing. One side using blood, the other ink. And the audience, the unborn, the readers, would decide which page remains. The tower sighed in the dark like an old beast, full but not ready to sleep. The grown men's game went on, layered and hidden, while Edward kept writing, writing as if a pen were the last sword left. The curse of blood. On the 15th day, blood became the only language spoken inside the tower. Edward's younger brother coughed through the night, and by dawn the white pillow had turned into a soaked crimson shroud. Edward sat beside him, dabbing frantically with the hem of his shirt, his small hands trembling as if they might snap. He bent low over the page and wrote a line that froze my spine. "My brother is turning into words. Blood is the ink. The bed is the page." From that moment, I understood. A 12-year-old child had been forced to see blood as script, as alphabet, because there was no other way left for him to be remembered. By noon, the priest returned. He carried a dark leather book clasped with a small iron lock. Each of his steps dragged in the smell of old wine and smoldering incense. He opened the book, chanting in his steady voice, but his eyes never left Edward. As he turned a page, I saw clearly. The parchment was pale, yet its edges were faintly stained red, as if once dipped in blood. His voice rose, solemn and dreadful. "Blood is the shortest road to God. Whoever gives blood shall be saved. What throne has not been built on the blood of children? You, boy, are only going sooner than the hundreds of kings who will follow." Edward bit his lip, clutching his brother's frail body, and cried hoarsely, "No, his blood does not belong to you." The priest smiled faintly, pressed his cold hand upon the page. When he lifted it, a fingerprint of blood glowed on the surface. He tilted his head and whispered, "Not much, only one drop. A signature. Enough for God to forgive." That night, the tower answered. The walls themselves began to bleed, red veins seeping down like a burst artery. Edward recoiled, clutching his brother tighter, and scribbled with jagged hand. The tower drinks blood as well. Not just men. On the 16th day, the guards brought a bowl of water. Edward raised it to his lips, yet the taste was iron. He spat it out, saw it glow red in the light. He slammed the cup down and wrote, "Even water has become blood." His pen split. Blood from his fingers spilled onto the page, forming words of its own. "I will not give, but blood gives itself." That evening, his brother burned with fever. Sweat streaked his temples. Blood seeped from his mouth. Edward wiped it away, but every cloth turned crimson within moments. He hurled the cloth aside, carved into the wall with a shard of stone. If they want blood, here it is. But truth does not live in blood. The wall immediately oozed fresh red, mocking, as though hissing back. Truth is nothing but this. Night fell, and silence suffocated the room. No whispers, no phantom hands, only silence. Heavy, suffocating, as if waiting for more blood to flow. Edward wrote, "Silence is also a voice, the voice of one who waits." Then he tucked the notebook under his brother's pillow and whispered, "If I vanish, keep it safe." The boy nodded weakly, lips red with blood, eyes clouded like fractured glass. At midnight, the bed grew damp and cold. Edward flung the blanket back. Blood seeped upward through the mattress, pooling as if someone had poured an unseen basin. His brother was too weak. It could not all be his. Edward shivered, scrawled, "This blood is not his. It is the tower's." And I knew. The tower was writing its story in the only language it trusted, blood. At dawn, the priest entered with 2 guards. They laid a white cloth on the table, set a wooden crucifix upon it, making an altar. His voice was steady. "The hour has come. Your blood will be the mark of God." Edward clutched his brother and wrote, "Not salvation. A sentence." The priest drew a silver knife. Its blade caught the dim light, gleaming against the old blood on the walls. He pointed directly at Edward. One drop to sign your name in the holy book. Then you shall be forgiven." Edward shook, terror flaring in his eyes. For a moment, he almost raised his hand, thinking of his brother. If he gave the drop, the boy might live. If he refused, the boy might be taken instead. His pen quivered like a dying bird. Then, from the bed, the brother whispered deliriously, "Brother, my blood is yours, give it away." Edward broke, sobbing. "No, never." He wrapped his arms around him. But a violent cough split the air, blood spattered across the white cloth. The priest lowered his knife to catch it, murmuring prayers. Guards pinned Edward's shoulders. In desperation, he bit his lip until it bled and scrawled, "This blood is mine, not his." The red letters burned upon the page, but the tower twisted it. The words bled, warped, forming instead, "Confession." Edward screamed, writing over it, "No, this is truth. Blood cannot change meaning." The priest lifted his dark leather book, declaring, "Who sheds blood confesses. This is your signature before God." Edward glared, fire in his eyes. "I do not confess. I write truth, and truth will never belong to you." The child's small voice shattered the silence. For a flicker, the priest's mask wavered, but hardened again. He gestured coldly. "Write down, the child defies God." That night, the tower growled low. The walls bled in steady drips, each drop like the scratch of a pen. Edward did not sleep. He wrote in ink and blood. The tower writes with blood, but so do I. Who will read last? Near midnight, his brother convulsed, eyes wide in terror. An unseen hand pressed upon his chest. Blood gushed from his mouth, staining the altar cloth. Edward lunged, grasping only air. He clawed at the stone, carving with his nails. The hand kills him. This blood is not God's. It is the tower's. I stood behind, watching fresh blood write itself across the wall. The tower used blood as its script, but so did Edward. 2 authors now contended, one of shadow, one of child. At dawn, guards entered, saw the red-soaked cloth. They nodded, murmured, "Enough. Record it." The priest looked at the stains and pronounced, "God has received." Edward raised his hollow eyes and whispered, "No, the tower has received." He slammed the notebook down. Blood spattered, letters blazed like an unerasable seal. On the 17th day, blood ceased to be accidental. It became symbol. Each time Edward opened his book, He stared into a mirror tinted scarlet. His hand trembled, yet when ink and blood dried, the letters bent, altered. The line, "I do not confess," warped as it dried into, "I confess." Edward shrieked. "Not me. I did not write this." He tried to overwrite, "This blood is truth." But the tower whispered from the stone, "Blood changes meaning. Blood is mine." I shivered, realizing the tower no longer needed to tear pages. It could corrupt them, twist denial into confession, truth into betrayal. That afternoon, the younger boy drifted in fever, eyes wide yet seeing nothing. His cracked lips whispered, "Brother, stop writing. Words are knives. Blood is also a blade." Edward clutched his shoulders, voice shaking. "If I stop, truth will vanish. You don't understand." But I understood. Writing had become a trap. To live, he must write. But every word became another weapon against him. That night, the walls bled again, but this time into letters. 5 red streaks slithered together, spelling one crooked mark. E, the first of Edward's name. He froze, carved back desperately. "Not me. The tower wrote this." Yet as the scar dried, laughter echoed in the dark. "You claim the tower writes. History will say you wrote." His brother coughed, blood splattering the notebook. The stain spread into a circle, then split like an eye. Edward recoiled, writing. Even blood turns to an eye. The tower is watching. The next morning, a guard lingered. He glanced at the page smeared in blood, smirked. The boy writes in blood. Mad enough that no one will believe him. Edward went pale, clutching the desk edge. He knew now. The tower's cruelty was not only to torment, but to brand him insane. A child witness discredited, reduced to ravings written in gore. That night, Edward whispered into the dark, his eyes rimmed red. "You want silence, but I swear, I will write until the blood runs dry." The notebook flew open by itself. The last page gleamed blank in the candlelight. The pen in Edward's hand trembled, dragged by another grip. Black letters appeared. End. Edward screamed, "No, not finished." He stabbed his finger, wrote in blood. "Not finished. I live." The page blazed red and black, 2 scripts entwined. The tower's lie, Edward's defiance. Truth and falsehood coiled like snakes around a child's throat. That night I saw him sitting beside his brother, clutching the book, eyes wide and sleepless. He was waiting to write faster than death. And I, standing just behind, understood. The tower's curse was never silence. Its true curse was forcing them to write until ink turned to blood, only to tear away the last page, leaving history with nothing but smears no one would believe. The darkness of the tower. On the 17th day, light no longer set foot inside the prison chamber. The morning outside was heavy with leaden gray, but no matter how bright the world beyond might be, the thickness of stone and the chill of iron bars stopped it at the threshold. The air in the room was like a heavy shroud smothering everything. Edward opened his eyes after a sleepless night, dry and weary. On the stone ceiling above, he saw a black stain spreading, not moss, not dried blood. It moved, slowly, inch by inch, like oil seeping outward, blotting out the last remnant of light. Edward trembled, pulling the blanket over his fevered little brother, whose chest rose and fell in painful jolts. He bent over the notebook, hands shaking as he wrote. The ceiling bleeds black. The tower wants to cover the sky itself. The letters slanted, smudged, as though scratched into reality with a knife. At noon, when the guard opened the door to shove in a bowl of thin gruel, a pale strip of sunlight slid into the corridor. But the moment it touched the wall inside the cell, it vanished. I stood behind him, and I saw clearly. The darkness of the tower was not ordinary darkness. It lived. It opened its mouth like a beast and swallowed the light whole, leaving the chamber cold as a crypt. Edward wrote, his hand shaking. Light disappears when it touches the wall. The tower doesn't want us to see. I watched the fresh ink, but froze. For a heartbeat, the handwriting no longer looked like Edward's. It was thicker, warped, as though another hand pressed down on top of his. I looked at my own fingers and saw a smear of black. My stomach clenched. Who was writing? Edward? Me? Or the tower itself, borrowing both our hands? By afternoon, the younger boy drifted into delirium. His cracked voice whispered through fever. "Mother, Is Mother at the door? Edward's throat tightened. He soothed him, whispering, "No, only me. Mother's not here." But then I heard it too. From the dim hallway came a woman's voice, slow, wavering, trembling. Child, come." I wait." Edward gripped his brother's hand, shouting hoarsely, "No, don't listen." I peered through the crack in the door, and I swear I saw a white robe flicker past. No footsteps, no chains, only the faint, sickly sweetness of burnt incense. The voice cut off, leaving behind a hollow, more frightening than sound. Night of the 17th. The darkness grew so dense that I could no longer tell bed from wall, door from floor. Only the ragged breaths of the younger boy, the frantic scratch of Edward's pen, and the pounding of his heart like it would burst his chest. Then it appeared. 2 wet hollows glimmered from the dark. Not human eyes, but voids, endless pits, staring into Edward. He froze, yet still tried to write, letters slashing crooked across the page. Eyes in the dark. They wait for me. The tower trembled softly. Dust rained down like ash. And in that vibration, the black spread further, creeping not just around them, but into the notebook, turning the paper gray, smearing Edward's fresh words into nothing. Panic surged. He snatched a shard of stone and carved into the wall. Words do not vanish. Words live in stone. But instantly, living moss as black as tar crawled across his carving. Edward shrieked in a rasp. "No, you cannot swallow words." And for a breath, I saw the carving shift, showing my own name etched there. I blinked, and only a smear of moss remained. My chest constricted. The tower was binding me into the story. Was it Edward? Was it me? Or both? When the night bell tolled, Edward clutched his brother tight and opened the notebook. Every page was darkening, the letters dissolving as if erased by unseen hands. In desperation, he scrawled, "If you read only shadows, that is the truth. The tower wants to erase." Then he dipped his pen in his own blood, writing over the fading ink in strokes that glowed briefly red, tiny sparks against the storm of night. But the darkness did not yield. Long, skeletal hands unfurled from it, winding around the younger boy and lifting him off the bed. Edward's scream tore the silence. "Give him back to me." He stabbed his pen into the void, splattering blood letters across the page. "The tower wants souls, but I keep my brother." And I saw the truth then. The chamber was no longer a room but a coffin, and the darkness was its lid, slowly closing. Edward had one weapon left, writing faster than death. And he chose to write. On the 18th night, the darkness lived inside their breath. Every inhale weighed like ashes in Edward's chest. His brother convulsed, eyes rolling at visions of overlapping faces, every one of them hollow-eyed. "Who are they?" I whispered. Edward scrawled, "They are those before me. The tower keeps them as shadows." Each word tightened the grip of the void around his brother's ribs. An invisible hand pressed deeper, blood beading from 5 distinct marks. Edward knelt, frantic, scribbling. The hand squeezes his heart, but I write to hold him. And I felt my own throat crushed, choking, as if the same hand clenched me too. Suddenly the notebook burst open. Edward hadn't touched it, yet the pages flipped violently until the last. The pen moved on its own, carving thick black letters. The end. Edward's scream cracked. No, not yet. He seized the pen, stabbing it into his own finger, scrawling in blood over the black. Not the end. I live. 2 lines, one black, one red, writhed together, a war between silence and truth, between the tower and a child. The tower struck back. The walls split, gushing tar-black liquid with a stench of iron. The younger boy convulsed, froth and blood spilling from his mouth. Edward clutched him, sobbing hoarsely. "Don't go. I haven't finished writing." He clawed at the wall, gouging words with bloody fingers. "They will tear the last page, but the wall will keep my words." The gouges bled scarlet, glowing against the stone, until a whisper seeped from the cracks. "These words are mine. I keep all." Edward howled. "No, I write for those who come after, not for you." He smashed the pen, blood spraying. Yet in the crimson light the letters burned, stubborn against the dark. That night, the void crept not just around his brother, but up Edward's own body, from feet to chest to throat. He trembled, but pressed the last page flat and wrote with blood. "If I am swallowed, know I resisted. I do not confess. I write. The letters twisted, blood spreading like cracks in bone. His brother's body convulsed once, eyes rolling back, then fell still. Edward shook him, calling his name, but only a faint exhale escaped. The pillow was drenched red. The tower shuddered, roaring softly like a beast consuming its prey. The darkness drowned everything: stone, blood, air. Edward sat rigid, cradling his brother, still writing with trembling hands. The living can choose. The dead cannot. I have not chosen yet. Behind him, I heard the tower sigh, a sound like paper torn in half. In that instant, the notebook quivered, its last page flickering as though about to vanish from Edward's grasp. And I understood, death was not the final act. The tower waited for only one thing: the tearing of the last page. The 18th night was not over. After the tower's sigh, the room fell into a strange in-between state. Not silence, not noise, but the slow heartbeat of an unseen beast pulsing through the stone. With each beat, the candle's dying flame spat a brief red glimmer before collapsing, leaving only thick, ink-like dark. Edward sat motionless, clutching his brother's cooling body. His eyes burned, dry, empty of tears. His hand trembled not from fear, but from the need to keep writing. He dragged the notebook onto his lap, dipped his pen into his own blood, and scratched across the battered page. They want me silent, but blood does not stay silent. Blood is the last voice. The letters leaned crooked, broken, yet each red stroke glowed, like cuts carved into the tower's own skin. From the ceiling, a black drop fell onto the page. Instead of spreading, it writhed like a worm, swallowing the red letters whole. Edward slashed at it with his pen, splattering more blood. The page bled brighter. In that instant, a hiss echoed, the tower itself recoiling at his defiance. Edward rasped, voice shredded. "You can tear, but you cannot stop me from writing." He gouged his finger into the wall and carved another line. "If the last page disappears, know it once existed." The stone split, bleeding red beneath lightning's flicker, as if the tower itself felt pain from his mark. The tower convulsed, harder than before. The walls cracked, the floor shook, dust rained down. And in that monstrous rumble, I saw shadows gathering, scores of faceless figures, eyes hollow and black. They stood as silent witnesses, as though an audience to a theater of blood. Then I realized, every victim devoured before, every soul consumed, lingered here, woven into the tower's darkness. They watched Edward, watched me, waiting to see if we could write faster than the tearing hand. Edward raised the notebook, blood dripping down onto the stone, mixing with the tower's tar. He screamed, voice breaking, "I live. I write. The tower is not God." The cry echoed, multiplied 100-fold, as though all those silent witnesses roared with him. But only moments later, the darkness surged and smothered even the glow of his words on the wall. And I knew, this chapter would not end with light, but with a void shaped like a torn page, waiting to devour everything. The torn last page. On the 19th day, Edward opened his eyes to a world of gray. His younger brother had lain still all night, breath as thin as a thread, vanishing and returning like a failing candle. Edward pressed his hand to the boy's chest, listening, then bent over the notebook's final blank page and wrote, "If my brother goes first, the truth remains. I will write for us both." By noon, the priest arrived, bearing a red-sealed parchment. His voice cracked like a whip. "The decision is made. The throne belongs to Richard. You no longer have a name." Edward did not answer. His gaze clung only to the notebook before him, its pen chipped, its ink thinning. The priest smiled faintly, leaned close and whispered, "The last page will never belong to you." Then he turned, letting the iron door slam shut, the bar falling with the sound of a coffin nail. That afternoon, storms gathered over London. Thunder rolled through the stone like drums of judgment. Edward hunched at the desk, his brother lying beside him. He opened the final page. With blood from his finger, he scrawled, "I have not confessed. I am king. The tower cannot erase these words." I stood behind him, watching each crimson letter shiver in the lightning's glow. But as the last stroke was drawn, the darkness surged like a flood. It poured from walls, floor, and ceiling, wrapping itself around the notebook. Edward screamed hoarsely, "No, it is mine." He clutched the book, blood spilling from his torn hand across the page. His brother opened his eyes one last time and whispered, "Brother, write quickly." Then they closed, never to open again. Edward sobbed, holding him tight, then buried his face in writing. "The living may choose. I choose to write. If I die, the words will live." And then it happened. A sound split the chamber, sharp and brittle, the rip of paper. The last page, soaked in blood and words, was torn free. The notebook flung open, spraying red, as Edward fell back, eyes wide with horror. He clutched the ruined book and howled. "Give it back. It was mine." But the last page was gone, snatched by an unseen hand. I looked around. No guards, no priest, only the suffocating dark. Yet the ripping sound echoed endlessly, as if the tower itself wanted to brand it into our skulls. Edward, trembling, scrawled across the penultimate page. They tore it. Who? Man or tower? None will ever know. But my words were written. The tower shuddered in satisfaction. Shadows withdrew, leaving the room smothered in funereal silence. The younger boy no longer breathed. Edward sat blank-eyed, clutching the book, still scribbling like a blind man pounding on a locked door. I understood then. The missing last page was the cruelest blow. It turned the story itself into an open wound, letting the victors write the ending as they pleased. That was the tower's true power. It did not need to kill swiftly or extract confession. It only needed to tear the last page. On the 19th night, the tower's air congealed like clotted blood. Edward hunched at the desk, candlelight flickering across his pallid face. His brother twitched occasionally in death's grasp, then fell still again. I stood just behind, feeling the weight of the moment. One child racing to write faster than death itself. He opened the last page. It trembled beneath his bloody fingers. He wrote, "I have not confessed. I am king. Whoever reads this, know that I resisted." Each letter was crimson, carved like wounds. A chill swept the corridor, the candle guttered. Edward froze, lifting his head. I too heard it, footsteps. Perhaps a guard changing shifts. Perhaps someone waiting silently outside. Or perhaps no one at all, only the tower exhaling from its stone lungs. Edward lowered his gaze and wrote on. "This blood is word. None can erase it." The instant the sentence ended, a ripping shriek split the silence. The page tore from his hands, sucked into the dark. He leapt up, crying, "No, give it back." Clutching the mutilated book, he searched frantically, but the page was gone. I looked closer. It was no accident, no gust of wind. A hand had taken it. But whose hand? From the corridor came the faint clatter of steel. Perhaps a guard's hand, reaching slyly. Perhaps the priest, slipping his fingers through the bars. Perhaps Buckingham himself, the bee that haunted the previous night, silencing a dangerous witness. Yet perhaps it was no human at all. The tower had already written words, bled from its walls, imprinted handprints of its own. Why could it not also tear? Edward collapsed over the desk, panting, scribbling jagged lines on the penultimate page. The last page is gone. None know who took it, but I wrote. The letters sprawled crooked, ink mingled with blood, yet still legible. Blood dripped from his bitten lip, staining the page deeper red. His eyes burned with the recognition of a merciless truth. In the tower, words lived only until a hand tore them away. That hand might be human or shadow. The result was the same, truth devoured. The sound of ripping continued in his mind, over and over, like a refrain. Each echo shortened his brother's breath. Each refrain tightened the corpse's shudder. Edward cradled him, whispering, "I will not let the last page be silence." Then with a shard of stone, he carved into the wall. There was a last page. It was torn. That too is truth. Blood from his hand seeped into the grooves, glowing faintly like fire. The tower purred low, like a beast well fed. It did not need to strike quickly. It left behind a single, terrible question. Who tore the last page? Man or tower? Or both? Edward, stubborn to the last, muttered as he collapsed. "They can tear paper, but not my bones." He fainted, still clutching the broken book to his chest, as if it were the last unconsumed piece of his heart. And in the dark, I knew. It was the absence, the hollow of a missing page, that killed more surely than any knife. It turned the story into a wound that would never close.